Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the NDNA virtual event. There's a packed lineup this afternoon. We hope you find it very, very useful to improve and provide information for you and your settings. It's Nigel from Citation. We've obviously been a long-term partner of the NDNA over the years, providing health and safety, HR, employment law, and a whole host of other services such as e-learning, employee wellbeing, and fire safety services to NDNA and its members. If you want to find out a bit more about the discounts available and how we can help you fulfill your legal obligations, my details are in the chat box. Likewise, you can always give us a call after the event, drop me an email. More than happy to discuss any individual requirements your settings may have. So yeah, that's it. Hope you have a great afternoon. Look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria and I'm here today from TTS and Consortium, NDNA's exclusive resource partners. TTS, you may know, provide educational resources for your nurseries, and Consortium are your commodities supplier, supplying your janitorial products, your baby wipes, your nappies, all those essentials you need for your nursery day in, day out, including all your arts and crafts materials as well. As an NDNA member, you do get exclusive benefits. For example, a 10% discount off all your orders with either TTS or Consortium, and also a one-off 20% discount when you use code NDNA22. We've also got a prize draw running today, so good luck everybody for entering that prize draw to win your virtual goodie bag.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you to everyone for joining us today at the Spring 2023 England NDNA member event. I'm Glenn Rothwell, I'm the Membership Services Manager at NDNA, and I'll be your host for the today's event. So this event is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it on our website after the event, and you'll also be able to see and read the speaker slides from the presentations that you will see today. I need to start off by saying a big thank you to today's sponsors, HR, employment law and health and safety experts, Citation. We do have several exhibitors with us today who are offering a range of products and services that you may be interested in, and you can enter our exhibitor prize draw. You should be seeing some details on your screen now. So there are some great prizes on offer, as you can see, from a free health and safety inspection to a £50 John Lewis voucher and an Alice Sharp's Eco Build from TTS and Consortium. Please scan the QR code that you can see on your screen there, and that will allow you to enter into the draw. And you've got until 1:35 p.m. to be exact to enter this prize draw. So hopefully we've given you a chance to do that for you there. I'll just talk through the agenda. So please note we have extended this event by half an hour. We wanted to take this opportunity of meeting with so many members to hear your views about the significant announcements made in the spring budgets last week. So we have added an extra agenda item to what had previously been advertised. So I'll just go through that now. The first speaker we've got today is our Chief Executive, Panima Tanuku. She'll be giving an update of what's happening within the sector. Following that, we have the exhibitors will be introducing themselves. And then we've got Wendy Ratcliffe and Alex Magloire speaking from Ofsted. After Ofsted, we have Catherine Hare from Citation, who'll be doing a presentation on smart solutions to get the most out of your team. We'll then do the prize draw, announce the winners. And after that, we're doing this extra item, which is the spring budget and implications for the sector, where we'll be conducting a number of polls to hear your views. And after that, it is, as previously advertised, Claire Warden will be doing her presentation from Mind Stretchers. Please be aware, this is a recorded video presentation. If you can't stay for the extra half an hour for this that we've put on for the spring budget, as I say, this is a recorded video, so we will be able to share that with you, and you'll be able to watch it in your own time after the event. You will have a chance to ask questions of each speaker straight after their presentation. To ask a question of the speaker or NDNA staff, please use the Q&A function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, and we will aim to ask this at the end of the session. You can chat with our sponsors and exhibitors using the chat function throughout the event. Again, you can find this button at the bottom of your screen. So just to go over those communication channels again, the Q&A function is to ask speakers or NDNA staff any questions. The chat button is for communicating with exhibitors. Finally, we really do hope that you enjoy today's event. We would appreciate it if you could fill out the short survey that appears at the end of the event, where you can provide your feedback. So if you're ready, Panima, I will hand over to you and you can give your presentation on the state of the sector.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again for joining us today. And it's absolutely brilliant. We've got so many people, over 100 people here who've joined. But I think, last couple of weeks been a bit of a roller coaster for all of us. And some of the things that we did not expect, and believe me, neither did I, absolutely. And there were lots of speculation, as you know, that before the budget was announced, but the only thing the Chancellor actually confirmed the Sunday before the budget announcement was about the universal credit element, nothing else. But while I was traveling from Wales from our Welsh member event, BBC were contacting me, have you heard the latest? What's your view? And I said, which latest? Because there's been that many stories. So believe me, none of us expected these announcements, but obviously there is a political urgency for these, and I'm sure you all know that. And because we will be entering into the election, general election arena by end of this financial year, and also probably early January as well. So that there is a political urgency. So I'll talk you through this, because I think what's important is really to understand the facts and figures, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of kind of, reactions, some positive, some not so positive. Some people saying the sector will collapse by 2025, and some people saying there's a disaster. And some people saying, actually, no, we need to work with this, but this is positive, but there are lots of challenges that we need to address before we go any further. But as you know, NDNA has always said, before we go on to any further expansion, we need to address the current crisis in terms of the 3 and 4 year funding. And of course, the biggest one is the workforce, because that hasn't eased at all. So let me go through the facts and figures in terms of the budget. So from September 2025, all children will be eligible for funded childcare from 9 months old. And so kind of this phased approach. So we'll come back to what those steps are in a minute. 27-28, this is expected to cost 4.1 billion on top of the 3.9 billion. So this is always an issue when government announce money. Sometimes is it new money? Is it existing money? Another announcement. That this is actually completely new money. All of this is new money on top of the existing 3.9 billion. And of course, the phased approach will mean that from April 24, all 2-year-olds will get 15 hours. That is from next year onwards. So really 12 months onwards. From September 2024, all 9 months old children will get 15 hours. From September 2025, all 9 months old plus, they will also get the 30 hours. So that's how it's been kind of, phased out. But the eligibility is exactly the same as it is, both parents working 16 hours, and the hours are 38 weeks a year. So that's what the announcement has been. And if you just look at the funding, that this is obviously the most interesting bit in terms of how this policy will move forward. The 3 and 4-year-old funding, the current rates, that is the 22-23, which is £5.4. But the announced rates already, 23-24, this is kind of, what the local authority, obviously, hopefully most of them would have told you, is £5.29. So the extra £204 million has been put on top of the current funding. So we've got a settlement of about £180 million for the current financial year. But on top of that, £204 million has been added, and the new rate will be £5.50 from September 23. So that is from this September onwards. And of course, the biggest challenge, which I've highlighted already, is that A, provided all that money reaches you at a local authority level, and B, I think, there is still a gap, because our survey has shown that the gap for 3 and 4-year-old funding currently is about £2.30 an hour. That's how much the gap is. So moving on to 2-year-olds, the current rates are £5.77, and the rates announced for 23-24, £6. And again, another extra £204 million means that from September 23, £8. That is from this September. And those are the new rates due to the additional money. And of course, under 2s, it's not applicable this year. It will only start in 24. And the extra £2.1 billion has been put into the budget. And that will work out around £11 from September 24. So how the government has kind of, worked out these rates, and this is obviously the kind of the question, because straight after the budget announcement, I had a meeting with the Treasury team. I had a meeting with the Secretary of State for Education, Gillian Keegan, and also met with Claire Coutinho, our Minister, as well. Because one of the things I've pointed out is most important thing here is, great, we got the new money, but we need to make sure all that reaches at a local authority level. That's where we have the kind of the variation across the country. And of course, also on top of that, what we need to make sure is the workforce crisis, which we talked about. But the interesting thing here, what we need to think about is, when I asked the Secretary of State about, did the calculations take into account the inflation increases and the potential increases, what the government have done is, inflation is running very high, we all know, but they've taken into account, the government hopes that the inflation will come down by September and will continuously come down beyond that, although we haven't seen any signs of that yet. Also, they've taken into account the current salary values, and I think that's a bit of an issue, because, and also energy costs, the government is expecting that will come down as well. So those are the assumptions that be made when they calculated these hours. But we know very well that it all depends on how these costs will come down. I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on. And if you look at the universal credit element, and this is UK-wide, obviously the hourly rates are only England only. UK-wide, the payments to parents will be made upfront from April 23, because this is something NDNA has really lobbied for quite a long time. There are two issues here. These are the children who really do need that high quality care, and especially the parents who can't afford to pay for it. They can't wait until the payments come, because what that means is for you to wait until those payments come. That means cash flow for you, and also difficulty for parents to be able to pay upfront. So that is a really positive thing. And so that's going to happen from this April onwards, i.e. next month. But the government did warn that they may have to look at the kind of the structure and how the funding is kind of passed on. And they're looking at that. But the OBR, the Office for the Budget Responsibility, expects that this would actually help 15,000 parents to get back into work. And also the gap in terms of the 85% gap means that it would increase the current amount of money they receive for £951 for one child will now go up to 1,118. And of course, for two, it's currently 1,600 and it will go up to 1,885. So as you can see, this is a substantial increase, and we hope that parents who are on universal credit will be able to take this up and most importantly, the benefit for the children from learning and development point of view. And I think those are the comments that have come out from everybody, including ourselves. You know, we need to put the child at the center of this, and funding must follow the child. And the budget seems to be more about the economic gain and the fiscal gain, you know, linked to that, rather than what's best for children. And is getting back parents back into work seems to be the fundamental area. And I mean, yesterday I met with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and with the Secretary of State for Education and the Minister, because there was an event at number 11 yesterday. And I made it very clear to him that, you know, business rates, I will keep banging on about business rates, of course. And he said to me, Padima, I'm absolutely aware of that. And I've told him the increase in terms of the revaluation. And he said, one thing at a time, we will look into that. And that's something that I said, you need to make sure business rates are looked at as well. I also highlighted the challenges in terms of the workforce crisis and how we're going to bring these people on board, where are we going to get them from, and of course the current, how can you front load some of that funding to address the 3- and 4-year-old funding challenge that we have at the moment before we move on to the expansion. So those are the kind of things I've discussed with both of them yesterday. Then there's no information, like I said, on how the system will be changed, but we will argue, one of the things that we will argue is that money should be passed through directly to providers, a bit like the tax-free childcare. Because I think one of the rumors I heard before the budget announcement was the government are going to get rid of tax-free childcare. And I thought, oh my God, no, because huge investment has been made in TFC to build that infrastructure. And this is really a stepping stone for our argument to pass the money directly to providers, because now parents have accounts. And of course, this money, that the new funding that's been announced, is for both working parents. So those working parents will have the account. So what we are saying is actually infrastructure exists now. So there is no reason why the government can't pass the hourly rate funding through that system. And I think, you know, again, we are continuing with that conversation with the Treasury team. Other announcement, of course, no surprise here, ratio changes, as you know, the consultation that the government did, and nothing has been published. And very, very sort of, you know, sneakily, this was published the day after the budget announcement. And of course, majority of them, and I don't think we need to look at the response to say majority of the providers and the organizations like us have said no to any ratio change. But they have announced that, but also what that means is it's optional and you don't have to do it. Now, one thing I did ask the Secretary of State, that really pushed her on this, is that what happens if a provider doesn't want to follow the 1-to-5 ratio? Will they be penalized when it comes to the hourly rate of funding? And the answer was categorically no. That's not how they built the system. So they're not going to differentiate people. If you're using, you get one rate, 1-to-4 ratio. If you're using 1-to-5 ratio, you'll get another rate. That is not going to happen. So that is some relief. And of course, the £289 million has been set up for wraparound care in primary schools. And again, this is to really help, you know, children with after school care and, you know, especially with parents working. And that will be an expansion in terms of the wraparound care. Apprenticeships for over 50s. And I think this is really great because, as you know, we've always said that, you know, we need both kind of mature people who can bring those life skills and life experience into nurseries, and also young people who are getting qualified and developing themselves. So we need a mixture of both. So through that apprenticeship for over 50s, we will be able to recruit people who are really suitable for you in terms of their life experience. We run projects like this in Wales with Welsh Government, and we've run this for nearly 5 years, and we're still continuing with some local authorities. So that's something that we'll be looking at in England as well. Childminder grants, and I think you probably know that the announcement was made that if you are a childminder, if you're with an agency, you will be paid £1,200. And if you are registered with Ofsted, you will be paid £600. As you know, there aren't that many agencies at the moment. So this is really to boost the numbers of childminders who are dropping out of the system. and also to encourage more people to join. Now, whether that will help or not, I'm not sure. Some of you may remember going back a few years ago when 30 hours first started, the government was giving £150, I think it was, or £500, I can't remember now, that long ago, and didn't really make a big difference in terms of more childminders coming into the sectors, but that's a different thing. So, of course, it's not just the Tory government or the current government who are, fast-tracking this, speeding this up. Labour have already made the kind of promise, and they've already set out some of their thinking. And what Labour is saying is the hour-based system, the hourly rate system is broken, it's not working. And they are going to get rid of the hourly rate funding, and which worry me a little bit in the sense of because, okay, fine, but in that place, what are you going to bring on? Nothing has been said yet. So what they're saying is simply voting on more hours to something that is failing won't address some of these issues, but also we need to look at expanding it from the end of parental leave up to age 11. So obviously, the Labour Party don't have to do any calculations. I'm sure they have been doing all their sums until the election, just before the election manifesto stage. They don't need to put out any detail. But recently, Helen Hayes did say that they are looking at this in the light of the spring budget. So, you know what? We've had this before, just before general elections. Labour came out at the last general election, not the recent one, the previously, when the pre-hours were announced. 25 hours, they're going to increase it to from 15. And then Conservatives then up the game to 30 hours. So this is the kind of bidding war that we don't want to happen without actually looking at the comprehensive review of how the system is going to work and what the challenges are. And this is something that we're trying to absolutely make it clear. And of course, look, the funding and detailed policy not yet decided yet. And of course, we have shared these concerns, and in a couple of weeks' time, there is a roundtable event that Shadow Minister has announced, and we will be attending that as well. And the not seeking to bring back Shoe Start, they've made that, but also in favour of family hubs, and that's the kind of, what they're saying. Looking at solutions within the existing infrastructure, which is a relief, because what we don't want to do is the government duplicating these services or adding something that already existing, because with the children's centres we've seen this duplication of services, and brand new spanking buildings were built next door to the existing high quality provision, and that's something that we don't want to see happening. And the positives, because don't forget there are positives, because we've got to be very clear about our messages. At the end of the day, whatever is given to parents with the help or support of cost of childcare, they are your customers, and for them this is positive. I had lots of MPs calling me and saying, "Oh, Panema, I'm getting lots of parents ringing the constituencies and saying, when can I have it? I'm going to lose out, and my child is going to be one, and I can't access it now." So I had to even explain to MPs, well, actually, even this is an ambitious plan, because we can't suddenly magic out space and places, and that's something that we need to be very aware of. But from an investment point of view, this is the biggest investment, and I've been with NDNA far too long, I'm sure some of you will say, but we have never seen this level of investment into childcare. But I think what also it made is brought early education and childcare right up to the top of the agenda, both from a media perspective and also from the parents' perspective as well, and political perspective, because the coverage we got after the spring budget, I was just absolutely running around like a headless chicken doing media interviews, and 176 items of coverage broadcast, every single channel we were on. And I think what was important is to raise that awareness. And I think a few years ago, when 30 hours started, parents didn't get it, didn't understand it. The complaints were, "Oh, well, my nursery is charging me a lot more top-ups and extras, and greedy private sector." That's the kind of comments we were getting. But now there is a very clear understanding from the parents' perspective in terms of what people think, because I did a 1-hour radio for the You and Yours program, and the parents calling, and then the producer said, "Can you stay for 1 hour?" I thought, all right, parents are going to throw all sorts of people. Not a single parent blamed the nursery for the cost of childcare. In fact, some of them actually said very clearly, we understand the nursery's problems, we understand the funding that they're receiving does not cover their costs. So that light bulb moment after such a long time. So there is a very clear understanding both for parents and for the media out there, and finally to politicians. That doesn't happen overnight. The constant lobbying and chipping away and producing evidence and surveys and publishing reports, that's what we do constantly with your support and the information from you, and I think is really important. Single biggest investment, yeah, absolutely, we can't deny that. But what it would also mean that it could leverage for other improvements, in terms of family services and other issues like the universal credit, and which is really, this is a beginning of a wider funding system reform, and it can be done if this works properly, and with the PFC, it can be done. And of course, parents' views and support from providers, and like I mentioned, and the media focus. But of course, there are always challenges. Of course, there is always concern from the sector, because you are the ones who are facing these challenges day in, day out. So the current 3 and 4 year old rates, 98% of you said underfunded. Current gap is £2.31. 1 and 2 year olds will be enough, but will it keep up? This has always been the case. And of course, the pass-through, how much will reach providers? We know this story across the local authorities is a different rate and different way of passing that funding, even with the 10% retained by local authorities. Delays in 95%, pass-through rate. Delay in uplift, of course, the new rates are from September, and how quickly are we going to be able to receive that funding at a local level? And workforce crisis, again, this is something that, somebody was telling me yesterday that they're paying £20 an hour for an agency member of staff. And even that is not really the right level of person or the qualification that they want, really. So that is something that you can't sustain forever, and that is a real issue. And the other biggest thing, of course, is that people will lose the kind of ability to be able to subsidize, because currently you're subsidizing the younger children, subsidizing the 3 and 4 year olds by actually charging the younger children the actual rate and the actual cost of delivery. And of course, share of the market for the government will be the biggest. The government will be the biggest purchaser of childcare in this country when it goes to 9 year olds to 3 and 4 year olds. So that means you won't have any room to maneuver to be able to make up any losses elsewhere. So that is going to be a real issue, unless the funding keeps up with pace year on year, and inflation increases and other business costs are actually added on top of that funding rates. And of course, Ofsted needs to be on board, working in partnership with providers and with the DfE, because some of this will have to be, will go into secondary legislation to make these changes. There will be changes to EYFS. And of course, most importantly, the timescales for delivery are pretty ambitious. Even when we look at 24-25, we're not talking about, it's not that far off. And wraparound care linked to primary schools. And again, what we don't want is duplication by schools saying, well, yeah, we'll take on 2 year olds as well, and we will expand our provision, and without taking into account what is already available next door. Now, where there is a capacity, of course, they need to look into that. So again, maintaining quality and child focus and all this, and that is a fundamental thing. That's why you're in this profession, because the most important thing is that delivering that high quality and putting the child at the center of it. And recruitment retention is going to be even more urgent now. And we have suggested, if you remember that is consultation on the ratios, what about other flexibilities? We've been talking for a long time with the DfE saying, we need to fast track and we need to bring some bridging qualifications, supervised routes to qualification, functional skills requirements. We need to look at all of them and not just any one thing. And of course, sufficiency, the quorum report, previously DfE denied that actually we're not hearing anything about, that local authorities have any sufficiency issues. You can see there, local authorities have reported they have got sufficiency issues. Even now, so moving forward, that would actually means that there will be more issues in terms of sufficiency. And again, ensuring sustainability, VAT business rates, like I said, we will completely, absolutely, we will, carry on with this campaign, because the rate reevaluation means that the current average rate now compared to November, in November, it was about 11,000 to 12,000 pounds. Now it has gone up to 21,000 pounds. That's due to rate revaluation. So that's a huge jump. Space requirements, by the way, apparently they came into play in 1940s. And we've been talking about that for such a long time. We need to revisit this because all of you have got open plan spaces and free flow and forest schools and all sorts of things. So this needs to come into the equation as well, not just because you want to pack children like sardines. That's absolutely not the case, but we do need to revisit this. And of course, managing parent expectations, you know, and the word free, it's still, Chancellor mentioned the word free in his speech. And we always say this is not free and it never will be free. And that's something that we must keep on pushing, because I know lots of local authorities have got rid of that word free. But of course, some of the parents are actually knocking on your doors already saying, when can I have my 1-year-old place or 9-month-old place or 2-year-old place? So managing those expectations are going to be pretty difficult, because you are the ones who kind of going to be facing that and already facing that. And of course, what I've absolutely made it clear to the minister is that consultation and engagement with the sector. And I said, you need to take the sector with you. You need to listen to the sector. You need to make sure, address all these challenges before we can, you know, let's walk before we can run. And that's the kind of approach we need to look at. Mentioned about the changes and in terms of EYFS and the secondary legislation. So we are looking at, and I think, you know, this pace of change is going to be pretty fast. Like I said, we held the webinar last week and we had 210 people joined, and which was absolutely brilliant. And I think some of you, I think I know a very small number have joined that webinar before. But what is also important is there will be several, we will be representing it at the several national level with the Treasury and different government departments. And we're going to producing some fact sheets, and this presentation will be available in the member only area. And of course, what we also wanted, the last webinar, people said it would be really useful to have some template letter to parents to explain all this so that their expectations are managed at a local level by you, and of course letters for engaging with MPs as well. So we are going to be looking at all that, and there will be consultation events, so we will have to push it very quickly. So you may not get much notice, but please do keep an eye out for these, because in summer there will be some consultation events that we need to be preparing for. And information webinars like what we've done last week. And of course, surveys, please, you know, it's not just we love to do surveys. Believe me, surveys take an awful lot of time to analyze. But that published data is what media want to be able to push these messages. That published data is what Treasury want to look at in terms of evidence, and the government would want to look at the evidence. So please make sure that you fill in any surveys that we do, because that's how we use them to be able to lobby in terms of what the challenges are for you. Again, regular updates, please do keep your communications regularly, check with it. If you're in doubt, if there is any issue, please do ring and talk to us. So I think Ofsted are ready and I've taken a little bit more time. I know I'm actually on time for a change, but we are going to pick up on this a bit later on in terms of the poll survey. We will come back to you again later on this afternoon with a lot more kind of questions, and some of you what you want to see NDNA doing as well, but most importantly what we want to let the government know in terms of what they need to do. Thank you very much. Thanks, Glenn.
There was just one question in the Q&A section during the presentation, and it was about the published rates, and obviously they're not reflecting what people are receiving.
Absolutely.
Just to answer that point, those are the average rates. So the government publishes a national average rate, whilst local authorities have got the rates for this April that they're going to be getting from the government. They don't yet have the rates from September. So we are looking at how that shakes down for everybody as well.
I mean,
so
again,
those are averages.
We want to hear from you, don't we, Jonathan, from members, if there is any quirky things going on at a local level. We definitely want to hear, because that's how we can pass it on to DFE and say, well, look, this shouldn't be happening if that rate is not being passed on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that evidence really helps. So, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you. Thanks, Penema. Thanks, Jonathan. Before we move on to the speech from Ofsted, I just need to introduce our exhibitors. So I'll go to each one in turn and they can tell you about what they have to offer. So I'll go to Nigel from Citation first. Nigel?
Yeah, cheers, Glenn. Afternoon, everyone. A lot of information from Penema there. Yeah, Citation, health and safety HR, e-learning, fire safety. Also delighted to announce that we've recently launched our Cyber Essentials service as well. So I know there's a lot of stuff kicking about in the press about cyber security, cyber safety, etc. So again, I'll put my details in the chat function. If you want to chat about Cyber Essentials or anything that Citation does, obviously NDNA discount supply as well, feel free to give us a call. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Cheers.
Thank you, Nigel. We'll go to Abby from the TTS and Consortium.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby from TTS and Consortium, and we are the exclusive resource partner of the NDNA. So as NDNA members, you get the exclusive benefits with us, including 10% off every order you place with us. And there's a special one-time 20% off discount per year with both brands. For anyone that hasn't used their 20% off code in the last 12 months, it does expire tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss out on that one. Just want to say good luck to everyone who's entered the prize draw today. And feel free to use the chat box to speak with us during today's event. And I hope you'll have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I'll hand over now to Courtney from Christie & Co. Courtney.
Thanks, Glenn. Afternoon, everyone. Christie & Co. once again delighted to be supporting this series of NDNA member spring events. A number of my colleagues are here as delegates this afternoon and looking forward to the insight being shared by the speakers this afternoon. So we're here, as always, to support you and assist you with all of your business property needs, be that for advice and guidance, consultancy, projects, rent reviews, or lease renewals. We're here to assist. So I'm going to share some information and links in the chat box. If you haven't entered the draw this afternoon, remember to scan that QR code, and we wish all of those entrants best of luck and enjoy the rest of this afternoon's session. Thank you.
And finally, we'll go to my colleague Linda Herriot from NDNA.
Thank you, Glenn. That put me on the spot a little bit then. So just to let everybody know, we've had an offer running on our food hygiene course throughout March. That comes to an end tomorrow. So if you haven't yet purchased, then please visit the NDNA website and you can purchase the food hygiene course for just £5. Okay, thanks everybody. Enjoy your day.
Right, thank you, Linda. Thank you to all of our exhibitors. They will be here throughout the rest of the event, so please ensure you use the chat box for any questions that you have for them. So I'm now going to hand over to Wendy and Alex from Ofsted, our first guest speakers of today. So if you are both ready, I will pass the mic over to you.
Thank you very much. Can I just check that everybody can hear me?
I can hear you, Alex.
Yeah, you're coming through, Alex. Yeah.
As long as Wendy can hear me, that's absolutely fine. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Magloire and I am a senior HMI and also the Deputy Director for Early Years Regulatory and Policy. Thank you very much for inviting us today to do an update for you. Just a couple of things first. Just wanted to reiterate what we always say when we come out and get an opportunity to speak to the sector, just to thank you for everything that you do. It really has been a remarkable testament to the passion that we have for children, that we stay in this game, and it's hard. We know it is hard. So we just wanted to extend our gratitude and thanks to you for really digging in and being able to sort of stay in the world of early years. I think it would be wrong of me to sort of start this conversation without acknowledging everything that's happened in the press over the last couple of weeks. We just really want to just acknowledge, and we are deeply saddened by the death of Ruth Perry from the Caversham School. Our thoughts remain with her family and her friends and her Caversham School community. I think it would be right to start with that acknowledgement before we get into our update. Having said that, I'm going to hand over to Wendy, who I think most of you already know, but I'll get her to introduce herself before we go into the slide deck today. Thanks, Wendy.
Hi, thank you everybody. And yes, my name's Wendy Ratcliffe. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm Principal Officer for our Early Education Policy. And that in essence means that it's my team who hold the pen, shall we say, on our inspection policy, our education inspection framework, how we inspect you when we come and do those inspections. So one of the things we've been asked to do today is talk to you and walk you.
Sorry, Wendy. It looks like you're sharing your other screen. We kind of see the next slide coming on.
Okay. So. That's going to be a challenge for me then. How am I doing that?
We can share our screen.
Yeah, that might be better actually,
yeah,
because I can
fine.
see the other screen.
Okay. Just to get that to stop sharing. That's fine. Hi, Wendy. It was passed you the remote control, so if you can just click on the screen, you'll be able to move the slides along.
Perfect, thank you. I should have just left it with your screen, shouldn't I? Would have been easier. Thank you. So how do I move the screen?
So if you click on the screen, you should be able to either use the arrows on your keyboard. Is that working okay?
Yep. Okay, is that moving on now?
It is, yes.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, so one of the things that we've been asked to come and talk to you about today is walk you through that inspection and what happens when on inspection. But just before we do that, one of the things that we just want to sort of like talk about is that, you know, we know that every child deserves that best start in life. And as Alex said, we really do want to thank you in the sector for what you do for the youngest children day in, day out. And we're really delighted that we've got Best Start in Life as our strategic priority for the next 5 years. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that towards the end. So let's just go into the presentation. So what happens on inspection? So it is the DfE's EYFS that sets out the framework, those standards that it is that early years providers have to meet. And we know, don't we, that children learn best when they are healthy, safe and secure, when their individual needs are met and when they have positive relationships with the adults caring for them. The safeguarding and welfare requirements cover the steps that providers must take to keep children safe and promote their welfare, and designed to help you create high quality settings which are welcoming, safe and promote and stimulating, where children are able to enjoy learning and growing confidence. And we're not going to go through those requirements today because you'll already be familiar with those. But also just to reiterate that actually on inspection, we don't go through each of those requirements, but what we do is we inspect in line with the principles and requirements of the EYFS through the lens of what is it like to be a child at your setting. One of the things we get asked a lot is, when will I get my inspection? So this slide just sets out those inspection window arrangements. And essentially, you will be inspected within a 6-year window. But actually, when will I have my inspection? Short answer, it depends, because we re-inspect based on the previous judgment. And yeah, it works in that way. So if you're judged to be requiring improvement, it's re-inspection within 12 months. And if you're inadequate, it's re-inspection within 6. And all of that information can be found in the inspection handbook. So how can I prepare for my inspection? Again, another question we get asked a lot. And in answer to this, we would say, do what you know is right for your children, not what you think Ofsted wants to see, what's right for Ofsted. And I think that's really, really important. Very much have that confidence to do what you do day in, day out, and don't do anything different just because the inspector calls. And to find out exactly what happens on inspection and the things that I'm taking you through today, have a look on our website and have a look in the inspection handbook. Everything that happens on inspection, the main activities that inspectors undertake when they carry out those inspections, and the judgments that inspectors will make are all within the inspection handbook. Would encourage you to have a look. There is no secret guidance. Everything that happens on that inspection is published in that information. So what happens first? So first of all, you'll receive a notification call. And here's just a few common questions that we get asked about the notification call. Is it the start of the inspection? No, the purpose of the notification call is to let you know that we're coming to do your inspection, and you'll get that call roughly around midday the day before, and it's that first opportunity to build that professional relationship between the inspector and the provider. Ask any questions that you might have. What if that notification call is at an inconvenient time? You'll be asked if is this a good time for us to speak? The notification call may actually take 2 calls because you might be, I don't know, doing a pickup at the time, and actually the inspector, can ring you back a bit later. The purpose of that notification call, as well as building those professional relationships, is about fact finding, really. So inspectors will ask you about the children that you've got in your care, just so that they can think about and plan for those inspection activities on the day that they come to see you. And this one's just a reminder of those judgments that we make. It was back in September 2019 that we introduced the Education Inspection Framework, and and you can see there, that was when we put the emphasis on the curriculum. Early years inspection used to be strongly orientated towards childcare, and the EIF puts due weight on the substance of early education, reflecting on those 7 areas of learning. That means what we're looking from you is to provide a rounded experience for children. And as we're looking at that quality of education, we'll also be considering personal development, behaviour and attitudes, and leadership and management. And inspectors, of course, will always have regard to how well children are helped and protected so that they're kept safe. So focusing on what matters. Within our inspections, it's important that we focus on what matters. We all know how important a child's early years are, and that children learn more in the period from birth to 5 than in any other times in their lives. As I said earlier, as inspectors, we're tasked with finding out what it's like to be a child in their early years setting. So therefore, we want to find out how you decide what it is that you want your children to learn and why you do what you do for the children in your setting. And finally, how do you know what you do is effective? We want to find out how you find out what the children in your setting know and can do when they first arrive with you, whether there are any gaps in their knowledge, and how you decide then to help them fill those gaps. We know what you do can make all the difference, particularly for those children who are struggling, particularly for those children who may have missed out on something due to the last 3 years in the pandemic. Thinking about those children you've got with you at the moment, those 3-year-olds who were born at the start of the pandemic. And for those children at risk of falling behind the majority, it's the early years is when it's the best time for them to catch up. So we want to find out about your curriculum when we're with you. And what do we mean by that? So the curriculum, it's set out in our handbook. We've provided clear definitions of what we mean by that. So the curriculum, it's a framework for setting out the aims of a programme of education, including the knowledge and skills to be gained at each stage. And it's the EYFS, Educational Programmes, sets out that curriculum framework. So thinking about what it is you want children to learn before deciding how you go about implementing that curriculum, and then thinking about how you know what you do is effective. So that's the curriculum. But on this slide I'm showing you now, this sets out the methodology for how we go about gaining that information on inspection. There's a number of inspection activities that we will complete on inspection. So we'll start with that learning walk. The learning walk around the premises with the provider, with yourself or your representative early on in the inspection is that opportunity for leaders to explain how they organise their early years provision, including the aims and rationale for your EYFS curriculum. And we'll discuss with you what it is that you intend your children to learn, know and do as a result of that curriculum you offer. And we'll follow that through in the discussions and observations that we have with children, staff and parents. And you can see how that works on this slide. So we start with that high level conversation. You tell us what's intended by your curriculum. We then go and find evidence that that curriculum is being learned and see that through children at play. So one of the things that when looking at your curriculum, there will always be a particular focus on communication and language, because the development of children's spoken language underpins all 7 areas of learning and development that are set out in the EYFS. And much of that discussion will be through those incidental conversations prompted by observing children at play and with the interactions between them and adults. And we know that communication and language is key, and it's important that we get that right in the early years. And that's why our summer curriculum roadshows, we've got some more curriculum roadshows coming up this summer, so keep an eye out for those, are focused on why communication and language is so important and how children make progress in this area of learning. And then we're going to look to do some more curriculum roadshows from the autumn, looking at the other 2 prime areas, because it's those prime areas of learning we know are also important to make sure children get off to that good start. And just to simplify things, this slide shows you the educational programme or the curriculum for communication and language that's set out in the EYFS in bullets. So essentially a summary of the educational programme. It's children's back and forth interactions from an early age that form the foundations for language and cognitive development. The number and quality of those conversations they have with adults and peers throughout the day are really important. Commenting on what children are interested in or doing and echoing back what they say with new vocabulary added. That's how we build children's language effectively. And reading frequently aloud to and with children, engaging them actively in stories, non-fiction, rhymes and poems, and then providing them with extensive opportunities to use and embed those new words in a range of contexts will give children the opportunity to thrive. And that last one there, through conversations, storytelling and role play, where children share their ideas with support and modelling from adults and sensitive questioning that invites them to elaborate, children become comfortable using a rich range of vocabulary and language structures. But actually, this does not, in our view, always get enough attention, and too often is replaced with literacy activities that focus on reading and writing. And the danger of this happening is that children then don't get the chance to learn how to explain those more complicated thoughts and ideas, or listen to them being explained. And if all of the above is happening well, it's likely that children will use language well in their free play. So let's just think about exploring that curriculum for communication and language. There are two main aims of the educational programme, and these are for children to build vocabulary and language structures, and for children to use that new vocabulary and language structures. And this happens through the means of interactions and those important stories, rhymes and songs. But we need to make sure that all children make good progress. So let's just remind ourselves, and you'll know this of course, that children who know less talk less. And isn't it easier for us to interact with those children who engage easily, those talk a lot children? Those children with the lowest starting points, that means those children who arrive with you having heard less words than others, doesn't mean that those children lack intelligence. It just means they haven't had that exposure. And therefore, we need to be as ambitious for those children as we are for others. Those listening and speaking opportunities will be less effective if we, as practitioners, do not consider what children already know, can do. And there's a danger that the chatty children get even more confident and those quiet children get lost. I'm conscious of time. We've talked about interactions and the importance of rhymes and songs. And let's just focus on this slide just for a moment. An important message: activities, of course, are not enough. So it's important that to emphasize that it's not enough just to come up with more elaborate, exciting activities. The problem with a curriculum that's based on activities and environments is that they do not guarantee that every child will learn what they need. We need to know what we want children to learn before we plan the activity. Planning in this way, through merely laying out engaging and entertaining activities, favours the advantaged, favours those children who arrive in their early years setting with their backpack already full of those wonderful opportunities and experiences. And that's because they've already had much of that knowledge already. They know how to enjoy those activities. We need to think about those children without the vocabulary or without the understanding they need, because they will then struggle to access those activities. So let's just remind ourselves, a curriculum is not the same as the teaching pedagogy. The curriculum is what is taught and not how it's taught. We need to decide what it is we want our children to be able to do during their time with us, before we think about how we go about it. The curriculum is not the same as providing experiences. Providing experiences is not the substitute for thinking about what children need to learn. The curriculum is not about devising more and more elaborate or creative activities, and it's not a substitute for working out what children need to learn and know. A curriculum is based on that proactive thinking, that thinking that you've done. It's the product of clear consideration of the sequence of knowledge necessary for children to make progress, and ensures that all children are ready for those challenges that await them. And of course, how do we know if we've been successful? Has the content of the curriculum been learned long term? And thinking about this definition, learning is defined as an alteration in long-term memory. If nothing has been altered in long-term memory, then nothing has been learned. And remember, as Ofsted inspectors, we're not looking for files full of assessment evidence on individual children. You don't need to take a photo of a child with a group of 5 bricks to prove that you have introduced children to the number 5. That just shows us a picture of a child with a group of 5 bricks. If you've been working with the child, you'll know whether the child can recognise 5, can count up to 5, can build a tower of 5 or not. And I think I'm going to hand back over to Alex, who's going to talk about how we look at safeguarding.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Wendy. So yes, I mean, all of this I'm hoping is just going to be a reminder for you of the types of things that we discuss and talk with you about when we're out on inspection. So inspectors will look for evidence of the extent to which leaders and governors and managers create a positive culture and ethos where safeguarding is an important part of everyday life in that setting, and that's backed up by training at every level. Inspectors will consider the content and application and the effectiveness of safeguarding policies and procedures and the quality of safeguarding practice, which is probably the most important part, including where staff are aware of the signs that children may be at risk of harm, either within the setting or within the family or even the wider community outside of the setting. So inspectors will consider how far leaders and managers have put an effective arrangements in place that helps to identify children who may need early help or at the risk of neglect, abuse, grooming or exploitation. The arrangements to help prevent abuse by raising awareness among children of safeguarding risks and how and where to get help and support if they need it. And also to help those children who are at risk of abuse and need early help, or unfortunately some children still need statutory social care involvement. So keeping an accurate record, making timely referrals where necessary, and working with other agencies to ensure that children and learners get the help that and support that they need. And finally, to manage allegations about adults who may be a risk and to check the suitability of staff who work with children. Now, I know that the NSPCC have recently published some statistics on child death due to abuse or neglect. And in the last 5 years, there was an average of around 58 child deaths by assault or undetermined intent a year in the UK, which averages out at about 1 per week. Children under 1 are the most likely age group to be killed by another person, followed by 16 to 24-year-olds. And child homicides are most commonly caused by a child's parent or step-parent. So it's people that we come into contact with on a regular basis. The modifiable factors that are prevalent in 31% of the cases resulting in a child death include the family environment, so where that is not a positive environment, a parenting capacity, and service provision, which is the support and help that a family may need in their early years. In England and Wales, the number of deaths for infants under 1 increased by about 100 from 2,226 to 2,323, which is the first increase in the number of child deaths for infants under 1 since 2018. I'm not going to go into any more detail about that because it's quite an upsetting stat, but if anybody is interested, the NSPCC have published their statistics. So in settings, shall I go to the next slide? Have you still got access to the slides, Wendy? Am I doing them?
Hi, Alex. You should be able to move the slides along. If you just click on the screen and use your arrow keys, that should work.
Okay, let me try that then. There we go. Oh. There we go. Okay. So in settings that have effective safeguarding arrangements, there'll be evidence of all of this. There'll be a strong and robust and proactive response from adults working with children that reduces the risk of harm or actual harm to them. Adults will know and understand the indicators that may suggest that a child is suffering or is at risk of suffering abuse, neglect or harm. And those staff take the appropriate and necessary action in accordance with their local procedures, which we know are not exactly the same in every local authority, but extremely similar, and following statutory guidance. Leaders and managers will have put in place effective policies that are understood by everyone in the setting. However, in order to do all this, settings need to have an effective safeguarding culture. So a little bit about what that actually means. We have uploaded some guidance which says, it's called Ofsted inspections, what EY providers and practitioners need to know. These can be located at our Dovecott's website, where you're very used to going. You'll find a number of separate documents for different provider types, and then these documents we hope will answer the questions that we are often asked relating to our EF inspections, and hopefully remove and prevent any misconceptions going forward. Finally, if I can change the screen here, okay. So blogs, so these have been quite popular amongst the sector. So we are continuing to do and publish a catalogue of blogs. There are some already on the screen, which are ones that are fairly recent. If there are any topics that you think you would like us to cover, we would love to hear from you. We're quite responsive when we do these. We don't have to be sticking to our own agenda here. So if there's anything that you think would like for us to talk about in our blogs, could you just drop us a line? I think you all have our contact details, and we're very, very happy to hear from you. Final slide. We might not be able to take too many questions, as both Wendy and I think we started a little bit late, so apologies for that, but Wendy and I both have a meeting to attend. But I'm just going to hand back to Wendy for the very last slide on our research.
Oh, gone one too many. Thanks, Alex. No, that's really helpful. So just to say that I have been, as you've been talking there, Alex, just popped some of those links into the chat bar. And the one I'm just putting in now is the link to our latest research, which is Best Start in Life, Part 1, Setting the Scene. As I said at the beginning, we're really pleased that we've got the opportunity to have Best Start in Life as our strategic priority for the next 5 years. And one of the things that we want to do as part of that is provide some information for those who are working directly with children about what high quality early years looks like, so that it will be helpful in terms of we know we've done a lot of that in the school space, and we want to be able to do the same for those who look after our youngest children. So Best Start in Life Part 1, it sets the scene, it gives the context about early years, what the sector looks like, what the staffing ratios look like, and really very much kind of like looks at some of those key features. There's 7 key features there that might appear in terms of high quality earlier education. So have a look at Part 1, and then there will be Part 2 and Part 3 coming out later this year. Part 2 will look at those prime areas of learning, and then Part 3 will look at the specifics. So I've popped the link into the chat. So yeah, hopefully you find that helpful. So that's everything from us, I think.
I think it's probably, unless there is any urgent questions, what we can offer, Glenn and Jonathan, is that we can take questions away, or you can email over a series of questions that we will then respond to via email, if that's acceptable. I don't know.
There is just one very quick question in the box, which is the curriculum roadshows that Wendy mentioned. Are they going to be online or just physical in-person events?
So they are going to be, they have been, we've been doing them since last summer. So they continue to be face-to-face events, which providers have found really, really useful. And we will be sending the invites out for those ones for the summer term via local authorities. So it's your local authority who will send you, if you're a registered early years provider, will send you the invitation. If you provide early years in the school space, you should hear about those from your school directly. And we will be in places such as Bristol, Swindon, Manchester, Newcastle, Leeds, those kind of place, Kent as well, the ones coming up for the summer term. So yes, so keep an eye out for those.
Lovely, thank you. That's all the questions that we've had in the session itself, but if there are follow-up questions, we'll take you upon your offer, Alex, and send them over to you. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank
back
you.
To you, Glenn.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Well, we'll have to move quickly on to Catherine from Citation. So, Catherine, if you are ready, we've got a packed agenda, so won't hear much from me. So I'll pass straight over to you if you're ready.
I am. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me. Can you confirm? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes,
yeah,
yes, we
brilliant.
can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So you've probably seen Nigel's introduction to Citation about who we are, employment law, HR, ISO provider. I'll let you kind of watch Nigel's video if you've not seen it. And I'll move on to the employment law aspect. So I'm an employment solicitor with Citation, and I'm going to be talking to you about employment law in the nursery settings, giving you some top tips on getting the best from existing staff, looking at both formal and informal procedures if you do need to take any action, and also touching upon engagement and welfare, which will hopefully help with retention of those precious staff within your nursery setting. So what are nurseries calling Citation about? Conduct, you'll see, it takes up a high proportion of the calls that nurseries make to Citation, and along with gross misconduct as well. That's not unusual for a sector, but it does mean that you are probably all going to have to deal with conduct issues. So I'm going to touch upon how to deal with those, what's expected from an employment law point of view, and how to be reasonable and fair, etc. You'll see that probation is high as well. That suggests that perhaps there's issues with recruitment, which, you know, it is really so hard to get the right staff into your nursery setting. But I'm going to talk about probation and how to get the best out of your probation process. Resignation is also high. That probably goes into the retention piece, which I'm going to talk about from a well-being, welfare point of view. And also ad hoc short-term sickness is also high. We're taking a lot of calls on that at the moment. And of course, that has massive implications for your settings from a ratio point of view, from a management point of view. So I'm going to talk about sickness absence as well. If anyone has any questions, please pop them in the chat, or if not, I'm happy to answer any questions later on if you want to contact me via email, etc. So I think the underlying principle when looking at any kind of dealing with any issues in your workplace is that you've got to be proactive and not reactive. And sometimes it's really hard to have those difficult conversations, and I appreciate that. And sometimes it's difficult trying to find the time to have those difficult conversations. But if you don't have those difficult conversations, if you don't manage things within your workplace, then you have this toxic culture, because people get away with being late, leaving early. The culture in your workplace is so important. It's really important that you are leading from the top. And if there are any issues, you nip them in the bud. You don't kind of put them off, because I know it's hard trying to find time to deal with these kind of issues, but actually it's a positive thing for the business if you can actually have these difficult conversations and deal with things proactively rather than reactively. And I would say as well, always trust your gut. If you feel like something's quite not right, challenge it straight away, because your instincts will be spot on. And it's really important to, like I said, to be proactive and deal with those issues when they arise. So looking at probationary period starting off, first of all, there is no such thing as a probationary period in law, so it's worthwhile mentioning that right from the outset. So it's really important that you have in your contracts of employment, your written particulars of employment, your probationary period. So normally they're 3 months or 6 months. It can be as long or as short as you want, but normally 3 or 6 months. You previously had a little bit of wriggle room about issuing your contracts of employment. You could do it up to 2 months from when somebody started. Now it's a day one right. So you need to make sure that when an individual starts, you give them their contract of employment, but that includes the probation period as well. And what I would say is that, some clients that we speak to can say, well, I feel like there are issues, but I kind of don't want to speak with the individual until we get to the end of the probation period. It's really important that you proactively manage a probation period. So if an individual's been with you for a couple of weeks and they're already starting to be a bit late, that has a massive impact on you for your ratios. How are you gonna look after the children if you haven't got people turning up on time to do that? So proactively manage it. Have that conversation with the individual to say, look, you're in your probation period. I've noticed you're being a bit late. That's not acceptable. You need to pull your socks up. You can document that conversation. Doesn't necessarily have to be a formal invite. It can just be, a review with them to kind of sit down and explain, what they need to do in order to pass their probation. So proactive management is really, really key. It's really also important that when you are dealing with probationary periods and you're thinking, well, perhaps, I might need to extend a probation period, that you document what you've done, have that paper trail. So we call them probation reviews at Citation. So when somebody perhaps is getting towards the end of their probation period, we would invite them into a probation review. We'd give them notice of that and tell them that they could bring a colleague or a union rep with them if they wanted to, and explain to them what any potential issues may be. I mean, a probation review can be a really, really positive experience if somebody's absolutely flying through their probation, and then that person then feels absolutely brilliant after the probation review, and hopefully then will be with you for a considerable amount of time. But if there are niggles, again, trust your instincts, because if someone's not performing in their probation period, it's highly unlikely they're going to do a 180 and be your high performing employee. Trust your instincts. So if it's a case of you think, they're not quite there, but actually with a bit of help they may get there, then you can extend the probation period, and you must do that in writing, and you must be very clear about why you're extending it, for how long for, and then what will happen at the end of that extension period, i.e. you will have another meeting with them. But of course, if they're just simply not performing, it's not working out, you're concerned already about the fact that the, like I said, for example, turning up late, leaving early, etc. Don't kind of carry on with it because you can't get anyone else. It's really important to then think, well, okay, we'll put that down to experience. They haven't passed their probation. We'll recruit somebody else, and perhaps think about who you're recruiting. Going forward, do you need to look at your recruitment processes, etc. But I would always say, trust your gut. If they're not working out in probation, it's very unlikely they're going to be your best employee going forward. And just kind of putting this in context, really, a case study on probation. So this was a nursery. They recruited a very experienced room leader in the baby room, had a great CV, interviewed really well. But when she arrived, wasn't what they expected, in that she couldn't really manage staff, really struggled to control them. People were turning up late, leaving early, etc. Also, learning journals weren't up to date. They were all over the place with paperwork. It just wasn't acceptable. She wasn't doing what was needed. So the nursery owner wanted to give her a bit of dignity, had a chat with her and said, look, both you and I both know this isn't working out. I'm going to pay your notice, and we'll both kind of part ways. She went straight to the employment tribunal, and she said, painted the picture to an employment tribunal that actually the only reason that she had been dismissed was because of her age, which of course wasn't the case, but she was the oldest employee. So she painted this picture of, well, she couldn't see that she'd been doing anything wrong, and the only reason that she could think of was because she was the oldest employee. Now, because the nursery owner wanted to treat her with dignity, there was no paperwork. There wasn't a probation review where we documented exactly what the issues were. And in those kind of cases, then it just makes it a bit more difficult to defend that case if it goes to an employment tribunal, because then actually you haven't got any documentation to back up what you've done. So just a word of caution, really. It's really, really important to have a paper trail, because employment tribunals are not pleasant. Discrimination cases are uncapped. So if she's alleging age discrimination, then potentially that could be uncapped damages. And at the moment, the Manchester Employment Tribunal is listing into 2024 for cases, especially discrimination cases. So you have that hanging over you for a considerable period of time. It's not pleasant for anybody. So what I would say as a cautionary tale is that if you are going to take any action, that you document it, you record what you've done, so you've got that paper trail. So if anyone does try to take any action going forward, you can very clearly evidence, well, no, this is why I did what I did. We had very, very good reason for not passing this lady's probation, and that certainly weakens the case considerably. The menopause. When you're thinking about getting the best out of your staff, you obviously employ a wide variety of employees, but actually it's likely that many individuals will be going through perimenopause, menopause, or post-menopause. I know that we saw recently about the apprenticeships for the over 50s. So there's a real drive to get individuals into the workplace to utilise the experience of those individuals. But actually, then that means that they may very well be going through the menopause, and there's a lot of awareness about this now. The Davina McCall documentaries about the menopause, and also recently I was reading that the Labour government have announced new plans that they want to support the well-being of women in the workplace, but particularly focusing upon the menopause, and that was based upon the Fawcett Society, who found that 8 in 10 women receive no support from employers for the menopause, and that 1 in 10 women say that they've left their job due to menopausal symptoms. So it's something that's really gaining momentum. There's so much more awareness about the menopause now, and staff are kind of expecting employers to be proactive in how they support individuals who may be suffering with menopausal symptoms. Now, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. I know the Labour government kind of pledged that if they came into power, they would look at asking larger companies to produce some menopause action plans. That is for larger companies, but that will filter down. There will be expectations by staff that companies will think about the menopause. And it, like I said, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It can be things such as, if it's a case of, it can get really hot in nurseries, is there a place where you could put fans to cool both, staff and children down? But if you have quite tight fitting uniforms, is it a case of you could get ones that are a bit more relaxed fitting for individuals who may be suffering with hot flushes, for example? Flexible working as well is something that's really going to be in the press shortly, because there's private members bill going through about flexible working, making it kind of a day one right. But is there something you could think about from a flexible working point of view if individuals are saying, well, I'm suffering with brain fog, I'm really struggling in the mornings, but I'm better in the afternoons, etc. But it's just something to think about. We have a menopause policy that we've put together that many of our clients use either in the employee handbook or as a standalone policy, which just kind of says, look, we are aware that people are going through these symptoms, we want to help you, and kind of have that almost open door policy of, I'm happy to chat about it, come and speak to me. A lot of our clients as well are having menopause champions, where people have done some training on the menopause symptoms, how individuals can be supported, and people can go and have confidential conversations with them just to discuss symptoms they may be suffering with and think about adjustments, etc. But it's just something to think about, that actually this is at the forefront of people's mind. There is a lot of awareness around this. So as an employer, looking at a retention piece as well, it's something that will certainly help create that positive culture within your workplace. And commercially as well, it's something to think about, because I think it was in 2021, the number of tribunal cases that cited the menopause increased by 44%, and that figure is expected to keep rising. So there are tribunal claims where people are citing the menopause as a reason why they feel they've been discriminated against because of their age, or perhaps they could bring it on a sex discrimination claim or disability discrimination claim, depending upon their symptoms. So just something to be aware of, really. But certainly it's certainly at the forefront of people's minds with regards to symptoms that people may be suffering. So like I said, conduct is certainly something that we take lots and lots of calls on, and it's something that does need to be tackled within the workplace. Now, of course, you can take formal action against individuals. That's absolutely fine. But sometimes informal action can be just as effective. And sometimes that quiet word can give the individual a bit of a jolt to make them realise that actually, I need to pull my socks up because, you know, I enjoy working here. I don't want to lose my job. I need to sort myself out effectively. So sometimes that informal action can be useful. It also helps as well to make sure that the individual feels supported almost, because you don't know what's happening. So you might be able to have an informal chat and things may come out in that informal chat, which wouldn't necessarily want to come out in a formal meeting, because you may want to support them, or you would want to support them through any issues they may be having. So we have a letter of concern that we use at Citation, which is really, really useful. And effectively, this letter of concern says, look, we've noticed that you've started coming in a bit late. This isn't acceptable. We need to see a massive improvement, and this effectively is a line in the sand. And it's really handy because the letter of concern will stay on their file. It's never removed, and it just evidences what your conversation has been with the individual and what you expect to see improvement wise. You could do that performance and for conduct as well. Like I said, it's fine to take formal action, but sometimes an informal word is better from a HR perspective and can have the desired effect. So it's just something to think about. If you are going to have informal chats, again, think about the paper trail. It's always good just to kind of like jot down what was discussed, when you discussed it, what action you said you expected to see in the future, the improvements. Keep a note of that. But I think sometimes informal management is the best thing to do in the right time and the right place. But it certainly can help having that letter of concern, because it does explain to the individual what your conversation has been about and what you expect to see going forward. And sickness absence. In a nursery setting, sickness absence is so hard to manage, because you need to know who's going to be coming into that nursery setting on any given day, considering that you've got ratios to deal with, and all other issues, management, etc. So ad hoc sickness is an absolute nightmare, especially in your setting. So it's something that needs to be managed. Hopefully you would all do these anyway, but return to work meetings are absolutely essential, and they've been found to be the best management tool, because if you do a return to work meeting consistently after every single absence, it is a massive deterrent for individuals. If they think that if they've had a day off because they just didn't quite fancy coming in because they've had a heavy weekend or something like that, if they know that they've got to then sit with their line manager and fill in a return to work form where, the line manager's saying, well, why were you off? Did you speak to your GP? Is this a long-term condition? Let me look how many other absences you've got. I can see actually you've taken quite a few Mondays off in the past couple of months. Is there an issue with Mondays? It becomes quite an awkward conversation for an employee. So actually having those return to work meetings are really, really useful. And even if an individual's off for a couple of hours, have that return to work the next day. What happened? Why were you off? Talk to me about it. They're useful as well because actually you can use those return to work discussions as part of your investigation. If you decide that actually this individual is having too many ad hoc days off, I need to take action against them. I'm going to take disciplinary action against them. The return to work can form a basis of the investigation because you've got all the information there about why they're saying they've been off, and then you can move forward to a disciplinary, because it's absolutely right that you are able to discipline an individual if they are having too many days ad hoc sickness. You need to be careful if there's any underlying health conditions, but if it's the case of that it seems to be Monday and Fridays, they seem to be having off, 1 minute they've hurt their elbow, the next minute they've hurt the toe, then the ear hurts, something like that. And there seems to be this pattern that needs to be dealt with, because you can't run a business like that. So you can certainly take action on ad hoc short-term sicknesses, but hopefully if you've seen that pattern emerge and you're doing these return to works and you're grilling the individual as to, why are you off again? You were off last Monday, you're off this Monday again, please explain to me. Hopefully the return to work will deter that. But if not, then you certainly can take action. Of course, if you've got somebody who's on long-term sickness absence, that's different. That's more of a capability piece. But again, if you have somebody who's been off for 3 or 4 weeks, has been signed off by the GP, it's really important as well that you manage that. So it's fine for you to have welfare meetings with the individual to kind of touch base with them, see how they are, if there's any adjustments that could be made to try and get them back to work. And I know occupational health can be quite costly, sometimes cost prohibitive, but actually the benefit in the long run is that occupational health will advise what reasonable adjustments they could make. If they say, actually, we think this individual should be back at work within 3 weeks, if in 4 weeks they're still not back at work, you've got some medical evidence to say, well, the health advisor, that the person who's trained in this field advised that you should be back in 3 weeks, and I'm just wondering where you are. Can we please have a meeting to discuss that? So getting medical evidence is really, really useful, especially if you need to move things forward further down the line, and it just gives you a bit of an insight into when you can expect them back into work, if at all. So managing short-term sickness absence is essential. Long-term as well, don't be afraid of having welfare meetings with individuals, because that will help you understand what adjustments you can make and help you plan for the immediate future going forward, if it's a case of they're not going to be in work for the next 3-4 weeks, etc. And also just think about how can you reasonably support people. If you are noticing that you are having high levels of sickness absence where people are saying that they're tired, exhausted, etc. I know it's such a stressful job that you all do, and all do an amazing job. But if there is an option to work flexibly, that can help people to feel that they've got a bit of time back, or they can have a bit of extra sleep if they need it, etc. And it can help with the engagement point. I know it's difficult to work flexibly in your sector, but if, for example, my daughter's nursery Fridays tend to be a bit quieter, potentially there's a scope for somebody, if they wanted to reduce their hours, perhaps they could do it on a Friday afternoon. It's thinking about being proactive and thinking outside the box, and how can we support individuals. But I think the key message about sickness absence is that you really need to keep on top of it, to manage it, and if you can get medical input for those who are long-term sick, that can really, really help in the long run. So I talked about informal performance and conduct management. You can, of course, take formal action, and sometimes that's what's needed. So if you are thinking about taking formal action, so for example, for conduct, if somebody is consistently late and that they're just not improving, then of course you can take formal action. It's important to think about who's going to hold each stage of the process, because ideally you would have somebody who holds the investigation, so a line manager, someone a bit more senior to hold the disciplinary hearing, and then a nursery owner who would hold the appeal if there was an appeal, because of course you can then make the decision to override any previous decisions that have been made, because you're effectively top of the tree. But it's really important that you set it out from the outset about who's going to hold each stage, because if not, for example, if the nursery owner holds the investigation, it's very difficult to then see where you're going to go, and then you've got issues about fairness, reasonableness of the process, etc. Talking about reasonableness, we do get pushback from clients about having investigations in these kind of situations. It's just an additional meeting, it just kind of delays things. What I would say is an investigation is absolutely key, because it gives you a bit of a dress rehearsal almost of the disciplinary hearing. So it gives you a bit of a heads up of what an individual might be saying in the disciplinary, and it means you can prepare for that. And if you need to do further investigation, you can do. So for example, think about lateness. If an individual says, well, in the investigation, well, I am late, but actually I've been really suffering with migraines, and it's the medication I'm on, which means it's really difficult for me to get out of bed. That then takes it in a whole different direction. You don't kind of want to be faced with that in a disciplinary hearing when you really should have dealt with it before. So what I would say is investigations are really, really useful. And you do most of the hard work in the investigation, because the disciplinary, the purpose of that is really just to decide the sanction. So I would always advocate doing investigations. And what I would say as well is about keeping performance and conduct warnings separate. There are 5 fair reasons for dismissal. Conduct is one of them, performance capability is another, but they are separate. So if we put it in context, so if you've got a chef who, for example, you know, I know like gold dust in a nursery, but have a situation where in a nursery setting, the chef keeps being late with lunches, and the last thing you want are hangry toddlers. Is it, you know, the lunch needs to be at, you know, 11:30 because that gives them time to have lunch, have naps, etc. You know, the chef just wasn't able to hit that 11:30 deadline despite being asked constantly by the nursery owner. She kept missing that deadline. So had her in for a meeting, asked her, you know, to really needs to improve her performance here. She was given a written warning. The week after, she kept missing the deadline again. A colleague came down and said, where's the lunch? You know, we need to get them out. And the chef really snapped at the person who'd asked where the lunches were, was quite aggressive in how she spoke. So the nursery wanted to build upon the written warning that had been issued for the performance, on the basis that she'd now snapped at somebody. So actually then they'd be on a final warning and in last chance saloon. But that's very different to the performance. You know, there was a clear capability issue here with not being able to kind of cook as efficiently as she should be able to get the lunches out on time. Snapping at somebody, speaking in an aggressive manner, that's conduct. So that will be very separate. You can't stack on top of each other. Those kind of issues, they are very separate. So you can have a disciplinary for how she spoke, and it may be that she gets a written warning for that. So she's on 2 written warnings effectively. But just be mindful that you can't be stacking performance and conduct warnings on top of each other. And I think, you know, if you are having to consistently deal with conduct issues, is it an issue about training? You know, do we need to think about training? Do we need a reset? Do we need to think about engagement? You know, conduct issues take up so much time. Ideally, you know, engaged, positive employees, you shouldn't have that many conduct issues. I know they do arise though. So it's important to kind of take a step back and think, gosh, you know, I'm constantly doing investigations, disciplinaries, etc. Is there something else that I can be doing within the business to kind of set that positive culture, set those expectations going forward? And just to kind of put formal action in context, really, this is another chef case. Lots of chef cases in nursery settings. So in this case, the chef was the only person who had access to the kitchen, had a you know, a key to be able to access it. Nobody else would be able to get in and out apart from the owner. And the owner did an audit of the food just to make sure that they had enough pasta in, bread for toast in the mornings for those hungry little ones who turn up in the mornings wanting the toast, and noticed there was a significant amount of food that was missing from the pantry. So, you know, bearing in mind that the chef was the only person who had ability to enter there, really, they decided to suspend the individual because there was potentially theft here. What I would say about suspension is don't knee-jerk. You've got to think very carefully about if there are alternatives to suspension. Have you got enough of potential gross misconduct before you suspend? But actually in this case, you know, it was only the chef who had access to that, and, you know, it was potential theft. So, you know, we had evidence from the audit that food had gone missing, so potential gross misconduct. In the investigation, the chef did hold her hands up and say, yeah, you know, cost of living, I can't afford to feed my children at home, so I have been taking food. So of course, then the nursery in a dilemma, aren't they? Because, you know, chefs are like gold dust. Good chefs are like gold dust. You don't particularly want to be losing them. And she had mitigation about cost of living, etc. But what I would say is, in that kind of case, you need to think about setting a precedent. You know, there has been clear theft here. Yes, chefs are hard to come by. Yes, she's saying I only did it because I needed to feed my children, but actually there was other ways that the chef could have dealt with that. They could have come to, you know, you as nursery owners and said, look, I am really, really struggling. Is there any opportunity for an advanced pay, or can you help? Or you probably would have given them food if they'd asked. But the fact that they took it without asking, and probably would have continued to do so until it was discovered later on, you know, that would be gross misconduct. So you've got to think about, you know, any action you take is setting a precedent. So if you are going to take formal action, follow a fair procedure, make sure you think who's doing each stage, but think about the precedent that you're setting going forward. And then finally, just touching upon employee well-being, this kind of goes into the retention piece. It's so hard to recruit people, you know, as we've been talking about previously, recruitment crisis, it's so hard to get people in the sector, but it's also really hard to retain them as well. So it's really important that you think about how are you going to focus on your people, and what can you give them effectively to have this positive workplace where they feel really happy to be in work, don't want to look elsewhere, and really want to stay within your setting for many years to come. So we call it vitamins of the workplace. You know, it's not about putting, you know, a fruit basket in the kitchen and kind of ticking the box to say everyone, you know, everyone's got some fruit that they can eat. So therefore, you know, I've ticked the box about employee well-being. It's about creating that really positive culture. But I think, you know, you can create a positive culture by just thinking about things like, you know, do I do appraisals with individuals? Do I have those one-to-ones? I know it's so hard to find time to fit those in when you've got to manage a nursery and all the things that come with that. But actually, having one-to-ones have been found to really, really help have this engaging, positive culture, because it just gives the individual the opportunity to feel like they have been heard. They have the opportunity to speak with their manager, to the owner, to discuss any concerns, issues they may have, and any little niggles that you might have not been aware of, but that you can nip in the bud or you can resolve there and then. So I think just having things like having those one-to-ones, having appraisals, they're really, really useful for an organisation, and they really help have that engaging, positive culture. Lifelong learning is also something that's really interesting. I went to a talk recently by a recruiter who said that actually millennials now are looking to work for organisations where they can learn and develop, and they would prioritise that over somewhere with better pay, which is really interesting, because you always think, oh, it's pay, you know, they're looking for more pay. Well, actually now millennials are thinking, well, how can I better myself for my own personal well-being? I want to learn, I want to develop. How can you do that for me? And I know that sounds really costly, but you know, you do have the option of using what's called training costs agreements. So if you send somebody on a training course, you can ask them to sign a training costs agreement whereby it says, look, if you don't complete the course, or if you leave within a year or 2 years, then you've got to pay back either the cost of a course or a proportion of the cost, depending on how long after you've left effectively. But that's something that a lot of our clients use, these training cost agreements. So you can invest in your staff, but then you've got the reassurance that you're not just paying out a lot of money for them to then take it elsewhere once they've immediately done it. What I would say, if you're using training cost agreement, think about the national minimum wage, because if you do end up deducting wages, there may be national minimum wage implications. But you know, think about that. Lifelong learning is so important to individuals. And what can you offer as a business? But think about training cost agreement to protect yourself as well. Also, thinking about, you know, charity work as well. You know, nurseries are so integral to communities. You know, I know that my nursery does a lot of work, you know, and it's children in need, Red Nose Day, things like that. Again, millennials will want to feel part of an organisation that is doing the social good. They want to feel like they're contributing to environmental change, etc. This recruiter that I spoke to said that some candidates are asking in interviews, you know, do you recycle? You know, do you use plastic cups? If so, why? You know, we want you to use paper cups, etc. So it's just thinking about, you know, if you do charity work, which I'm sure loads of you do, shout about that on your website. That's so attractive to people that you're recruiting. It's also really attractive as a retention piece as well, to show, look, we are giving back. We are aware of our social obligations, etc. That's really, really attractive to individuals. And then just finally, thinking about the welfare of your staff. Employee assistance programs are so useful. We have that at Citation. They're run by people like Bupa, and it just means that if individuals need to speak to somebody, speak to a counsellor because they may be going through a personal issue or have financial concerns, etc., if they don't particularly want to speak with their line manager, they can speak to a counsellor under the employee assistance program, and they can get advice from them. It's a really positive thing to do as an organisation. And also think about mental health first aiders. We have those at Citation, people who've been on a mental first aid course, who individuals can go to speak to if they are having mental health issues or concerns. It's just someone else that they can speak to discuss any problems they may have. And that really helps contribute to the vitamins of the workplace. So that was a quick canter through some top tips. I hope you found that useful. If anyone does have any questions, you've got Nigel's email there. He can pass them on to me. I'm happy to speak with anybody or answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm afraid we are just running a little bit over time.
Yes, I know. So I'm conscious. Apologies.
We're struggling to be able to do questions. I think there is one in the Q&A. So if we're able to move that to the over to the chat function, and if Nigel can respond to that in there, that would be great. I need to move on to announce the winners of the prize draw before we move on to the next section. So let's have a look who are the lucky winners. So if we can bring that up. So the winner of a free health and safety inspection worth £495 from Citation is Joanne from Shane Annie Nursery. Well done to you. So the next prize from TTS and Consortium, Alice Sharp's Eco Builder World. The winner is Lorraine from Little Tigers Day Nursery. Well done. And from Christy & Co, a £50 John Lewis voucher. We'll reveal the winner. It's Emma from Castle Nursery Limited. So well done to all our winners. I'm now going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to pick up with our next bit on the spring budget. So I'll hand over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Glenn. So I think I should have control of these slides now. So this really picks up on what Panima was saying at the start of the session. We've got some really quick poll questions. So what will happen is the poll questions will appear on the screen as a pop-up. You'll have the opportunity to have a think about it. We'll leave it there for a few moments. Have a think about the questions that we're asking, give your answer. But then if there's further things that you want to get across to us, there is that option in the chat function as well to make comments and provide a bit more information, because the poll questions are really about getting some of that data and some of that detail. And why it's important is there's a lot of changes that are probably going to happen very, very quickly. We want to be making sure that we're really pushing for the things that you need with the data and information that backs it up, because as Panima's mentioned, there's not that information, there's not always that understanding. So government ministers and civil servants have been asking for feedback straight away from the sector. So this will be added to the poll data that we got from our webinar last week, but I know the vast majority of people on today weren't part of that. So our first question is really about existing capacity. So do you currently have waiting lists for 1 and 2 year olds? So are there already 1 and 2 year olds waiting to come into your settings already? Because obviously if the government is talking about expanding those places and there's not enough space already, then that's going to be the first issue. So just a moment longer on whether you currently have a waiting list for 1 and 2 year olds. I think that should be enough time on that one, Connor, so if you can just pop the results up. So yeah, very, very similar to what we've seen before, which is about 3/4 of people having a waiting list already. So that creates a challenge already. Thank you for that one, Connor. So the next question, because we know workforce is a real pressure. So could you take on more children if you had more staff? So is staff shortages, in your toddler or baby rooms, is that one of the reasons why you have a waiting list? Yes or no, could you take more children if you had more staff? And again, the chat function is open if there's anything that you want to add to your answers. So just a moment longer, and then I think, Connor, we've probably had enough time on that question. So again, a similar proportion that yes, staff shortages are one of those limiting factors, and that's why, as Panima mentioned, workforce is one of the crucial issues that we need to get right for this policy. Okay, next question.
Do people need a bit more time to answer? Are you okay with the amount of time we're giving?
We can give a bit more time. I'm just we're a little behind the agenda, so I'm just trying to make sure we do have enough time for the rest of the questions. So the next question, I think for some reason the poll is cutting it off, but it is there on the screen as well. Will the expansion of 2-year-olds offer mean more children coming into your setting? So what we're trying to get to the bottom of here is this going to be a case of the children who are already in settings, the parents who would already be putting children into nurseries, just getting that paid through a different way, so government funded, or do you think that actually there would be parents in your local area who, you know, you would have more 2-year-olds coming in once that funded offer kicks in? So we've given you yes, no, and don't know as the options for that. So would the expansion mean more children coming into your settings? And I'll give you a moment with that one, because this is a bit more of a thinker, Penny. I'll give you that. Okay, Connor, I think that's enough time on that one. So yeah, so there's a little bit of uncertainty. So 1 in 5 of you sort of not knowing. But for about a third of people, yes, it would bring more children into the setting. So that's, again, that means more important to address that workforce shortage to make sure you've got the staff for those extra children. And then thinking about that, so staffing is one issue, but physical space is another one as well. And Penema has mentioned the space requirements, so that is obviously something that needs looking at. But physically, the way your setting is at the moment, would you need to expand your physical space to be able to take on more of those 9-month-old, 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds, so more of those babies and younger children? So that might be, you know, changing your rooms around. It might be expanding existing rooms. It might be building an extension. But we also recognise that for some people, whether it's planning issues, you're in a rented property, or just physical space that you're unable to expand. So yes, you would need to expand. No, you wouldn't need to expand because you've got space to take on more children if you had the staff, or if you needed to, or see you're unable to expand. I'll give you another moment with that question. Lovely, Connor. Can we see the results on that one? Right. So yeah, so that physical expansion, and one of the things that we've seen in policy expansions before is the need for capital funding. So that's really useful information for us to take forward as well. And then Penema mentioned earlier, we've just published our nursery cost survey, and the feedback was 98% of people said that the 3- and 4-year-old rates don't match the costs. And when we asked about how much per hour you're underfunded, the average that came back was £2.31. So what we're asking here is, does that sound right? So we've given you the options of actually the underfunding. So if you think it's more than £2.30, answer higher or much higher. If you think actually no, you know, it's £1 or lower than that, then go lower or much lower. And if you think that £2, £2.30, £2 and a bit sounds about right, then go for that option.
Yesterday, interestingly, Jonathan, the Pregnant and Screwed who were there at the meeting were asking me, why is our hourly rate kind of gap is £2.30? And I think something else that was published was much higher than this, or you know, some were lower than this, and I had to explain this is an average, you know, gap, and also every setting is different. Their cost base is different, you know, from a small play group to a preschool to a nursery to a childminder. It's all different, and that's where the kind of the gap comes in, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, does the underfunding rate of £2.31 sound about right to you? And again, any comments that you want to make above and beyond that, please feel free to pop it in the chat. Lovely. Connor, can we have the results on that one? Okay, so for most people it sounds about right, but for those, it's more likely to be that the gap is a bit higher or a lot higher for those people who don't agree with that. Okay.
This is very
Lovely.
similar, wasn't it, with the webinar that we did as well?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for that one. So then going on to the next question. This is about the universal credit and the upfront payments. And again, what we're asking is whether you're aware that you have had parents who've said, I can't actually take up a place, or they've tried to take a place and there's been a problem because of the upfront payment requirement. We know that for some of you might not have heard about that from parents, they might not have shared that information, but for some people they do have those conversations. So yes, parents have been stopped from taking a place due to the upfront payment requirement. No, they haven't, or you don't know because you've not had those conversations. And again, as Penina said, what we want to be making sure with this is that actually the system is as smooth as possible for parents and providers. And the easiest thing for us on that front is to make sure that it's paid directly to providers through a mechanism like tax-free childcare. Okay, lovely. So yeah, can we have the results of that one? So yeah, a pretty even split there between the yes, no's and slightly more with not knowing. So I suppose it is a difficult question to answer if you haven't had those conversations with parents or parents haven't been that upfront. And then the next question is, so as Penina said, we are always going to be focused on funding, and we know it's the key pressure and it feeds into so many other things. So what we're asking here is, outside of funding, what is your top priority for NDNA? Penina's gone through quite a few of these in her presentation. So what of those options is your number one priority? So we are going to ask this question 3 times. So if there's something on there that you think, oh, it's a toss-up between qualifications and recruitment or business rates and recruitment, then we are going to ask this question again, so we get your number 2 and number 3 priorities. So do have a look at this list, think about what you might want to do 1, 2, and 3, so that because what we'll do is we'll give weighting to your top answers, but it means that we can be focusing on the things that really matter to you. So recruitment and retention, reform of qualifications, so that's things like we've talked about with bridging qualifications, supervised or fast track qualifications where someone's got a degree in a different area but a lot of life experience, VAT and business rates, which remain a real cost issue, the space requirements that Penina mentioned, capital funding opportunities, challenging the concept of free, because it is still being talked about as free places, even though some local authorities are calling it funded. So that puts extra pressure on providers from the expectations it creates. The reform of how the funding is delivered, and then further flexibilities with how you run your settings. Or again, if you've got other options, please put details in the chat. So that's your top priority. Recruitment and retention for 2/3 of people, sorry, yeah, and then business rates and challenging that idea that the places are free. But the big thing, and it comes out from the earlier answers, is recruitment and retention of staff, and that's good to see that. I mean, it's not good to see it, but it's good that is reinforcing that is our number 1 priority. Can we have so this is the same list, but this is number 2. So if you put recruitment and retention, what comes after that in your mind? Similarly, if you put business rates, what's number 2 behind that? Or challenging free, what comes behind that one for you when you're thinking about this expansion?
I think one thing just says without, goes without saying is really, the message we're giving to the government is you need to make sure that, that child development and children's learning needs to be a focus equally as economic growth and getting parents back to work. So putting that child at the center that's exactly why you do what you do day in, day out. So that goes without saying. So it's not an option in our view. So, and I think it's something that we've been pushing all the time.
Okay, I think that's enough with that one, yeah. Okay, so yeah, recruitment and retention is still up there for seconds for people, but then it is spread out a bit more between qualification reform, VAT and business rates, and then how the funding is actually delivered to providers. Thank you. And then last but not least, what is your number 3 priority? So again, thinking about what you've already answered, what's third on your wish list? And you know, this is your letters to Father Christmas, your Mary Poppins wish list, you know. We really want to be, again, focusing on the things that matter to you. So please pop down your third priority here. Again, I'll give you a few moments just to do that. Lovely. I think that's probably enough time. You should be really familiar with that list by now. So again, it's spread out, but we've got qualification reform and funding system reform. So I think what we'll be doing is compiling this with the feedback that we had in the webinar last week, and we'll be turning these into plans in terms of what we're doing to provide direct support to yourselves, but also what we're taking away to government when we're having those meetings, and shaping the consultations that are going to then be taking place. So you know, across NDNA, the different directors will be taking this you know, to all the different meetings that we have.
I mean, altogether, we've already got 320 responses, you know, from last event and this event. But I think, you know, that the issue is with the pace of change. We can't wait for Father Christmas to deliver the letters in December, because we need it to happen now. And that's why. And what is really refreshing is that, you know, all the things that we've been asking for a long time, I think here is our opportunity to actually make this happen. Because without that, what we're saying to government is, you can't deliver this, the sector has to deliver. And unless these changes are made, sector won't be able to deliver this policy. So that's the kind of message that we need to give. That's the urgency that you know, in terms of the pace of change. So this evidence is absolutely great. So thank you for that. I think, Jonathan, we should have had another question. Did you find this this member event useful? Yes or no? I hope that you will be able to give us some feedback after that, but we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. And there will be follow-up feedback questions at the end of the member event. But I will hand back now to Glenn for the last agenda item.
Yeah, just checking, Jonathan, if you've picked up that question in the Q&A there. There's a point there that.
Oh no.
If you're able to.
Well picked up. Sorry. So yes, the qualifications. Yeah, so I mean that's come through loud and clear, the point about qualifications on the of recruitment and retention, and obviously feeding into that is the qualifications. And something that that we are looking at as well is rather than waiting for people to get to 15, 16 and talking about, you know, the possibility of early years as a career, actually trying to get that onto the curriculum so that they're understanding child development, because we know where it has happened, that's created a bit of inspiration for people, so that they can think about, actually it would be really exciting to work in early years and childcare. But then if they're coming through with those qualifications that but that aren't full and relevant, that they can make that jump across, because that exists with international qualifications. So, you know, we're saying, why can't that exist with domestic qualifications as well?
There is a special DFE workforce group has been set up, and I'm part of that group along with Stella, our Director of Training and Quality. So these are the issues that we've been highlighting for quite a long time now. But like I said, this hopefully will now be picked up pretty quickly compared to what they were doing, because it's already too late in terms of getting people in. The crisis is here and now. So those are the messages that we're giving. So thank you.
There's just one more question that's arrived in the Q&A about whether the survey that we've just published in Wales has been replicated in England.
Yes,
yes, we have. We put that out about 2 weeks before the budget, no, a week before the budget, to get maximum exposure on early years and the pressures that people are under. So in terms of your question about settings breaking even or making a loss, 83% of settings told us that they would be in that category, with 45% expecting to break even and 38% of nurseries saying they expected to operate at a loss, and that formed a key plank of saying that, you know, the existing funding for 3 and 4 year olds has to be addressed, and for funded 2-year-olds has to be addressed before any expansion can take place. Now, what we've said in immediate reaction is costs are going up in April, so that delay between April and September is not, you know, is going to be quite damaging, and we will, you know, we do risk losing, you know, more settings in that time period. But you know, the government have said that September is the earliest that they can bring in that increase into the planned rates for 23-24. So there will be a small increase from April, which are already announced, and then they're working through how they're going to increase the rates for September. But we've said that, you know, it's too much of a gap, and that unfortunately that will have a detrimental effect on people who are already struggling with the rising costs.
Okay, then, well, thank you both. We're going to move to the last item on the an extended agenda, because we fit in the extra polls there. So this is a pre-recorded video from Claire Warden of My Stretches Academy. If you aren't able to stay and watch it, we will be sending it round afterwards for you to watch at in your own time. So I'm going to hand over to Connor and the team to put that presentation on for you now.
Thinking around nature pedagogy. I think one of the exciting things is that we've been having conversations around outdoor play, sustainability, nature-based provision. We have all sorts of terminology for it, but I think we're ready now in our educational practice to be thinking about how it's all connected. And that's in essence what nature pedagogy is. It's a way of working with children that puts the natural world at the heart of all the decisions you're going to make. So let's get started, and I'm going to take you through some ideas that I've had over time and share with you some of the research, I suppose, around it. All right. So one of the things about the ideas around green teaching are that we are all very much in a sense of place. And that means that we have a community that surrounds us. We live in a land that has a climate, a defined way of working in harmony with the natural world. We have a curriculum that's devised usually by the government in most of the countries I work, and that means that it's got some expectations, but it's also got guidance in there. And it's lovely to see that outdoor play is very important and it's within our curricula, but there's not just about outdoor play, it's about the place of nature, and it's also about the rights of children. And there are all these different threads that need to come together really to help us understand how we create a strong sense of place. One of those critical elements, of course, is culture. And it means that you'll be working with families who have very different values around the idea of both sustainability, climate change, just being outside in the natural world. And so we're working in quite a diverse space. We're working in a space where we've got to really be able to move on a journey to embrace the natural world in a way that means something and is relevant to the people that we work with. When we look at the reasoning around some of this work, it's about saying to yourself about why do we need to do it? Well, we know that actually the urban and rural divide is moving towards the urban space. So at the moment, 68% of the world's population will be living in an urban space by 2050. Right now, it's just over half. Now, what that means is that children's encounters with the natural world are going to move from having freedom of large areas to be able to go into more urban space, which means you're looking at urban parks, you're looking at trees along the street, as you can see here. But we've got to drill down into what actually are we talking about when we mean nature. Well, for me, it's all those small elements. It's the shadow on the ground that this child is making. It is the tree, but it's also the leaf. It's the sunshine, it's the rain. So the four elements of earth, fire, air, and water are the drivers within our programming. And that means that when we start to look at planning, we are both child-centered, but we're also nature-focused in what we do. Now, for us, in terms of the ideas around this, we've got to begin to, I suppose, have an idea around what the aspects are that are really important. One of the questions for me is around whether or not it's even possible to define a pedagogy, a way of teaching that really learns about the natural world, learns in the natural world. We can learn from it. It's huge lessons from the natural world in terms of the things it's trying to teach us. We can also, therefore, make actions and devise our experiences that are for benefit to the natural world. Now, in previous times, we've been very ego-logical, and that means that we've always put humans first. Our needs come above everything else. And so that means that we've got our planet, sadly, into a place that's not very healthy. Ecological ways of thinking put everyone together, and you can see in the diagram there on the right, human beings are just part of the natural world. And that means that if you don't take care of everything else, the pollution, the air, the animals, the insects, it's going to impact yourself as a human. So when we start to think a little bit around what are the values that we really need to embrace, in my research, I came up with many, and I'm going to share some of those with you. The first thing is that we need to adopt a way of being that really thinks about ourselves in a relational function. And that means that we all know about children and how they are very central really to the idea of being surrounded by family and friends and community. But do we also take into account that they are an integral part of a relationship with the animal kingdom? This picture on the screen is very much about that fascination with the rest of the natural world. And so what we can do is get a little bit hierarchical, and we study things like snails. We take worms and we put them inside. But if you're going to be a nature pedagogue, what you would try to do is to imagine that those animals and plants and indeed the land have their own rights. And that means that we study the snail, but we study it in its own habitat. And if we do take it into a place, it doesn't live inside with us for very long. And we do make sure that it always goes back to the place it came from. Now, that kind of very gentle day-to-day behavior is all part of being a relational pedagogue. When we look at some of the First Nation thinking, we can see about the power of all of those relationships. And in Auckland Nature Kindergarten up in Scotland, it spends 80 to 90% of its time outside. It's a model of education. Underneath it is the philosophy of nature pedagogy. How we teach with young children is very relational. And so we have mixed age groups. You can see here children from 2 to 5.5 years old, working together on a beautiful song that they are going to sing, not for us or for the other humans, but they go, it's a song for the trees. So as they walk into the forest, they wanted to sing to the trees. It's those relationships that become quite natural in the work that we do. Second one to think a little bit about is the idea of biophilia. And biophilic design is the love of the natural world. In Scotland, we have something called currying in, and currying And the idea of homeliness has been very much a part of our culture, as it is in the Norwegian cultures. So we're hearing lots of people talking about these cultural influences on the way that they're organising their indoor space. You may be sitting there thinking, oh, this is quite like the work in Reggio Emilia. That's because Loris Malaguzzi believed in biophilic design. That means it's home-like, very gentle lighting. We look at pastel colours, we look at colours of the earth, we have spots of colour that come through, whether it be resources or children. We have natural materials that are more pleasing to the eye. They have a strong textural sense. They're very sensorial. They're often upcycled, which means that we're using the idea of sustainability within our choice for the materials that we have. A lot of people look at the idea of organic forms. Froebel, Steiner, great theorists, they all embrace this idea of biophilia through looking at abstract shapes for their building blocks. And then the last one on here is the idea of flow of space. And so the idea of corners, people are beginning to look at more rounded shapes if you've got control over the architecture of a building. They're beginning to look at how spaces connect in nurseries and stopping, I suppose, the siloing. So the 2-year-olds are engaging with the 3 to 5s because that's seen to be a more natural way of growing up rather than only being with children of your own age group. Here's a lovely example where people have taken the idea of the biophilic design principles, spot of colour there in the music area right at the very back. But as you can see, everything else, including the living plants, is all put in place in order to create this environment, this space inside which embraces nature pedagogy or the values of it. Here are some more examples, gentle spaces, often homemade materials. So the table on the left-hand side has been handmade. The tree area, that's the cozy corner in an outdoor kindergarten. It's actually a tree branch that's been used to create that inside. And then the log cabin on the right-hand side with the sheepskins, again, is a resting space that's been brought together to give that sense of being connected and appreciative of natural materials. Here's the outside space, and the outside space at Upload Nature Kindergarten was actually designed by children. And so they wanted to have an arch and a bridge and a gate and some peepholes to be able to look through before they actually entered the outdoor space. So when we really look at biophilic design, it is partly about the materials, but it's partly about the child's voice and how they influence that environment that we make. This is the area beyond the gate. And for me, the definition of those 3 things is inside your building, outside is your outdoor play space, often designed by humans, by adults. And then the third space beyond the gate is a place where nature is often encountered in a more unpredictable way, in a wilder way. And so we can't control it. And that's why it's so very effective in terms of supporting children. One of the aspects of the Green Teaching book that I wrote, which is the result of my PhD, was about the understanding of how we learn from nature. How we learn through the land means that we integrate those 3 spaces, inside, outside, and beyond. If your beyond is a city centre, there is still nature there because it's there in the form of stone, it's there in the form of shadow perhaps, maybe the trees that are lining the pathway on the way. So it's still there, but it's presented in a different way. What you call the blue-green balance is slightly different. When we learn from the land and through the land, it means that we embrace the idea of being curious, of being adventurous. Now that's both metaphorically in our thinking and those kinds of inquiries that children get involved in, but also physically. So it's a space where children are expected to really reach out and become, I suppose, discoverers and explorers. So even outdoor spaces become less controlled and less adult designed, and they have a higher percentage of child ownership. We work in nature time, and that means that an inquiry for us, a child-led inquiry into a worm, for example, won't just take a week or 2 weeks. It might actually drip feed through the whole year. And later on, I'll be talking a little bit more about the way that we do responsive planning and documentation through a concept I have called floor books. And they are designed as these large documentation books to collect children's ideas and theories over a long period of time. So it could be that for us, a growth inquiry might actually take place over 6, 7, 8 months. It's very important for me that we remember that children are holistic and think in holistic ways. So they look at the entirety of an element. We need to give them freedom and we need to give them time to explore through this child-led inquiry that I've just been talking about, where adults are there to step in when they see a significant moment, but a lot of the time they're stepping back, they're giving children this sense of authentic experience. So these children have been out in the garden, they've picked their the red currants off the red currant bush, which they planted some months ago, and now what they're doing is that they're actually creating their own, what we call refrigerated jam, which essentially is crushed berries with a little bit of sugar. Now, one of those things that's important to hold on to is the idea of relevance. It matters to these children to make the jam because it's authentic, because they've seen the bush grow. They planted it, in fact. So often we do things in early years that aren't always authentic. They actually have very little meaning to children because we've just got caught up in the creation of ideas. Whereas this approach to education is much more about, okay, these are the fascinations of children. How do we take it forward to make sure that the things that we provide, those experiences and the spaces that we create are relevant to children? We can, of course, use all of these inspirations as provocations. You can see here we've got both man-made materials, the letter X, and alongside it we've got a beautiful shell that's been put onto the overhead projector. But the important thing to remember is that this is an exploration into shadow, light and shadow, and light and shadow is connected to the fire element, which means that we are working in nature pedagogy when we use shadow. We often remove it, but this holistic way of thinking brings it back together. When we look at child-created design, it's not always pleasing to the eye if you like that control, but the important part when we look at created spaces is that we look at behaviors. So the list that you have here on the left-hand side is about verbs, it's about construction, it's about making, mixtures, traveling, performing, changing aspect, thinking about running and leaping and balancing. Once we take behaviors in our landscape design, rather than it's a mud kitchen, it's the sandpit, it helps us to really understand the purpose of the environment, to help us understand what the narrative is for those children that we're actually working with. So here's an example where in London, where we had really just a blank playground, and it was seen very much as a place not connected to indoor experiences really at all. That's why you've got the number line on it. And so what we had to do then was to create a different space, create a space that was about journeying. So lots of pathways. Wanted to create a space that was about mixtures. So we needed the water pump. We wanted to create a space that was about exploration of natural materials. So you need dry play sand, but you also need a muddy grit, and you also need a builder's sand. And that's what's in those big circles there. We wanted the water element, and so that's the dry riverbed that can be made wet by the use of the water pump or a hose pipe. So when you're doing your design outside, ask yourself, where is the element of fire in terms of light and shadow? Where is water present? Where is earth, and how is it manifested? What does it look like in my outdoor space? And so that means that when we're looking at the element of air, it's everywhere, but the increase of these larger trees, the increase of things that show movement of air means that children can actually visualize it and engage with it. We can look at corridors, and the materials that we use are very natural. Very little plastic in here, although there were plastic balls used on the actual bamboo itself. One of the other values is place-based. As I mentioned earlier on, we're all about culture, connection, and identity. That cultural capital that we all have is what we bring to it. So for this little boy climbing this mountain, which is really just a mound of earth with grass on it, it's important that the tree to his side is a Scots pine, that he's talking about big boulders, that these plants that are here are native species because this is his place. And although the mountain, as he calls it, is maybe only a meter high, it's been created and designed to really focus on a place-based experience. Here's another beautiful environment, but this is now in Australia. And what we should be able to do is to walk into different nurseries in different parts of the country and see a reflection of the culture and community that's outside the walls, beyond the gate. So for this particular environment, they have what we call a yarning circle here, which is the idea of stones in a circle. They use lots of artifacts and cultural relevance, these things here, didgeridoos, and lots of beautiful materials. You know, they're bringing in the gum leaves out of a native tree as part of their display. So the whole thing has been beautifully thought out, and in order to make it feel connected to the community in which it's based. A value around this would be about participatory thinking, and that means that all my life I've believed that children have a right to be heard. The UN Convention Rights of the Child encourages us to do that, but if we do embrace that as a rights-based culture, then we must listen to children's theories, their plans, their ideas. And so this was some work I was doing with a group of children about their understanding of how we could sort out some seeds and some sticks that we'd found when we'd been outside on a walk. So they're not sorting out the individual elements into a set of dishes that I've given them. They are actually creating those, whether you're using rings or you're using a different set of baskets. But it's up to them to decide how they will subdivide it. It's not just about, oh, I'm going to divide it into two. They may have had 32 different reasons. And as long as they can give us the criteria for sorting, then I would argue it's very valid. Nature pedagogy means that there's a higher visibility of the natural world inside your environment. You can see in the background here, again, those muted colors, lots of loose parts with things like the fir cones being brought in, natural fibers on the cushions on the sofa. But it's also about making sure that you've got enough pictorial, enough visual stuff, whether it's on the wall or it's on these little picture frames, and the reference books that go with it. So people begin to realize that you're not just studying a worm, but you're studying a huge variety of different aspects of the natural world. And there's a very obvious presence of it inside your building. This is a lovely display area that I think has really reflected that. So as children have gone out and they've made their discoveries, whether it's been a giant fir cone, or they've maybe crushed some berries here to make some berry ink, or they've found the clay and they're sticking things in the clay, this very simple display area brings that outside experience very firmly into the indoor space. And that means that what you're doing is validating it and making sure that people realize how important it is to you in your practice. Now, as I mentioned, in the 1980s, I came up with a planning approach called the floor books. And floor books, I'm delighted to say, are very popular, and that's because they're working documents. They're the place where we write down children's voices, we document their thinking through photographs, and then as practitioners, we analyze what we have in those floor books in order to devise next steps, or what I would call a plod, a possible line of development. The book in the bottom right-hand corner here is the one that you might be familiar with. And one of the things about floor books now is that we're really beginning to see and celebrate their use in countries whereby they're trying to get more responsive planning. And that's certainly true within England at the moment and parts of Wales. In Scotland, we've always held on to the idea of there being a responsive, a spontaneous response, if you like, to children's playful thinking. So floor books then gather documentation over a block of time, and it means that we can really look at progression through that floor book. So there's probably too much just to talk about it all just now, but that's further reference if you'd like to go and find out some more. If we're inclusive and we're very rights focused, then there are behaviours from the team that are very important. And I know this may sound very obvious, but I'm increasingly concerned with the fact that I meet some people in early education who don't appear to like children, which astounds me. So one of the things is that we need to be kind. And I know that sounds very humble, but being kind to somebody means that you listen, that you care, that you pay attention to them, that you share your thinking in a very gentle way, that you have sensitive interactions. And this gentleness of being with children, I think, is something that we maybe need to refocus. Some of us have it intuitively, but I think just for all sorts of different reasons, we've maybe lost sight of that. And so again, here we are with the floor book at our talk around that, paying attention, giving yourself that time to really listen to children, to make sure that everybody is included. All of the work that we do really in nature pedagogy is connected to the natural world in some way. There isn't anything that anyone really brings up that I think isn't or can be reflected or connected to. So even if you're talking about superheroes, the superhero to me might be Batman, but actually let's have a look at a real bat. If your superhero is strength, let's have a look at some of the animals and insects in the animal kingdom who have super strength for their size. So we can really be creative in helping children feel that no matter what they bring to the learning moment, it's going to be included in our planning. I love this photograph because it's just a very small area in the corner of an outdoor play area. It's in an in-between space. It's just under a cover. But you can see here how gently people are working with the resources they've got. And there's a care and attention to the materials that have been put out. Again, more upcycling here, that we're not buying new resources, but we're taking the opportunity to look in charity shops, to repurpose things. I have, again, a little bit of a question mark over people who are selling things to make them look as if they're upcycled, whereas the whole point is they should be truly upcycled. So therefore fairly unique, because you never know that you're going to find something when you go into a charity shop. Because of that, it's a very eco-centric pedagogy, and it means that we are striving towards as much sustainable behavior as we can find. It's everything from being involved with power use to lighting structures to everything. But it also means that we're living those values. It's not about just getting a green flag. It's about making sure that every day the decisions you're making, the paper you choose to buy, the paint you use, do you use glitter? If it is it biodegradable? All of these things add up to living the values of sustainability. And that's what's really important, I think, when we come to look at places that really live it, that have a balanced way of looking at things. Someone did ask me once if I only believed in wooden buckets, and that's not true. A plastic bucket or a bucket that you've got, a metal bucket, is made of that because that's the thing it needs to be made of. But I don't need to buy tons of plastic to go into my environment. There are other options for me. Now, the other thing that I think is very important and fairly unique to nature pedagogy is that all of our planning, as I said before, is done with and for children, but it's in a way that we have a lens. And that means that the curriculum, if this was your opportunity and children were very fascinated really by slate and stone and rock, that you would then start to look at the possibilities. So possibility thinking means that you go off down what we call lines of inquiry. So just from that element of stone and rock, I could look at movement, size, appearance, creation, creative uses, cultural use, creativity for art, display, and so on. So these visual mind maps are created with children and for children. And that means that we develop them and we have them as, I suppose, a historical experience. So we've got documentation over many years of the kinds of fascinations that children really love. When we come to present things, and I mentioned this earlier on in terms of curriculum, we have an authenticity. And that means if we're going to look at orange, then we need to look at orange in all its complexity, every shade of orange. We're going to eat oranges. We're going to look at an orange pumpkin, because when you reduce orange to one color paint, what you're doing is something called reductionism. And that means that you're taking away all the beautiful complexity of the natural world and replacing it with a very dull option, orange. So this display I love because they're going to make pumpkin soup. So the Dutch oven is there because they're going to make it. They've got a recipe book, they've got a story book, they've got the pumpkin itself for children to go over and touch and imagine. So this is set up as a provocation when children come into the nursery in the morning, because all of this complexity goes together to make a holistic experience for children. It's a very riskful space, and often when people talk to me about risk, they say, oh, you mean physical risk? And I don't really. I'm talking about emotional risk-taking, social interaction. That's a risk-taking moment. There may be physical aspects. There may be some which is actually more about intellectual risk-taking. So if in your provision and your experiences, you do too many things that are rather dull, there are maybe colouring in or templates or cutting things out for children, all of those behaviours really reduce the intellectual risk-taking. And if you want children to be intellectual risk-takers, then it means they have to work out themselves how they're going to build a tower. How are they going to draw a person that's big enough to cut it out? That is the actual learning that you want. And often what we do as adults is we take away those moments. So it's about creating a pedagogy that really embraces risk-taking across the board. Part of that risk-taking, as I've mentioned there with the intellectual risk-taking, is that we look at close encounters. And close encounters might be something outside with the snail, but it's also dancing in the shadow. It's also bringing those elements of the flowers, as you can see here. They've been picked outside, they've been dried in the microwave, and now they're being used within a floor book, so that children are constantly thinking about knowledge, skills, and concepts. And as adults, we can pick up those threads and pull them out and put them into our planning. I've mentioned already the place of the uniqueness of the natural world. And I think for me, it's about the celebration of complexity, as I mentioned before there, that we don't reduce orange to one colour paint. The same is true for all the aspects, really, that we encounter with young children. A puddle, for example, or a stick. They're so full of possibility, but we often don't notice those or value those as much as some of the things that we might have in an indoor environment. So this is all about challenging the idea of individualism, which means that we want to be children who are flourishing in our sense of belief in ourselves, and we want to be individuals. So my interpretation of a leaf is very different to yours. But however, you are also creating something called a community of practice. And that means that you want to have conversation, we want to have dialogue, we want to have children sharing their knowledge about the leaf alongside another child who's telling them their theory about a leaf. That's the power of the floor book. It's a place for dialogue and celebration. Here's that mind map again. And so if I saw a child who was engaging in leaves, for adults, we need to understand the potential and possibility that we could look at appearance, division, growth, pattern, decay, the creative use, preservation. We could even look just at line and shape. And each one of these lines of inquiry could be something that we spend weeks and weeks exploring, because we are looking at this sense of child-led inquiry. Now, people ask me often to talk about landscape design, and this, which is actually in the Childminder's Garden, is perfect. It's got rock elements, it's got the earth there, we've got an artificial stream bed that they've made, and it's got a little trickle of water that goes through it. We've got diversity of leaf types, we've got colour coming in there, and we've got the fact that the grass isn't overly manicured, so that you're free to pick it, you're free to engage with it. So if you were to just look at a blade of grass from here, well, you could also have a blade of grass here. A blade of grass then could be grown in a pot if you've just got a balcony, or if you've got a very small outside area. So your planting schemes need to be similar in that they're showing diversity of grasses or diversity of leaves, but they can be put anywhere. They might even go on a roof. We're still talking about leaves. Here we've got beautiful array of different leaf shapes, different leaf types. They're growing in different positions. That's the fascination for children, is that they're still investigating leaves. They're still talking about their homes and where they live, but we've kept it quite narrow. And by doing that, children go deeply into their investigations. We might go to the park, great, but this is now the autumn. So where do you put the documentation in when you're working in nature time? Well, for us, it's in the floor book, which means that we might start off with an inquiry around growth and leaves in the spring, but we revisit that continually, and then we might make a conscious focus on it in the autumn as those leaves start to change. But we would also pick it up in the winter to show that the leaves have come down off some of the trees in the park. So you're cyclicking through in response to the seasonal variation that the natural world offers us. This was in a nursery environment that's right at the very top of a building, and they had very little space. They could look onto nature, and there is certainly some benefits for children for doing that. But they created literally square meter beds to allow children to actually go over. And it was fascinating to see that for some children, it doesn't need to be on a large scale. For some children, it's actually about having pot plants inside. Because if you look at this, we've got everything from the spiked plant, the aloe on the side, we've got round leaves coming out, and then we've got that lovely dark red of those next leaves, and we've got a yucca plant in the beginning. Diversity and complexity. And then our job is to step in to help children notice those, to step in and have a conversation in almost a philosophical way. What if? And why is that like that? So the wondering questions help us understand both our own thinking, but also the thinking of the children that we're with. When children show what they know in pedagogy, there's a whole variety of different ways of doing it, of course. But for the work of nature pedagogy, two things come together. One is that very child-led documentation and planning. It's all about the child-led inquiry. And then the second half, the other half of it, is about the idea of it being both inside, outside, and beyond, and based in the natural world. So when you bring those two halves together, it's quite likely that you are embracing something called nature pedagogy. The way you know if it's worked is by revisiting that documentation with children. This is actually one of the family books, an individual profile that we use, and we could use digital documentation and do for reaching parents, but for us, there's a physicality of documentation, the essence of a book that really brings out the language and joy when children revisit their own journey over a number of years when they've been in the environment. So what's next? I've really just given you a very quick introduction to some of those values that sit underneath the idea of nature pedagogy. I hope for you it's given you some thought around things like relationship, to take the step beyond just going outside into an outdoor play area, but asking yourself, how do I make a link for children between inside, outside, and beyond, both in my intent, in my planning, but also in the way that I talk and behave across those different spaces. It may well be that you've watched this and actually your outside area is still quite sterile. And that means that for you, it could be reframing your view to see that shadow is part of nature pedagogy, embracing something that's about a rainstorm, looking at something that's just about to stick, but trying to make sure that it's not just done in a glib way, a very quick way, but that you're slowing it down and giving children a real chance to explore it. Now, in order to help people, there are various other things that you could have a look at. So one thing you might be interested in is something called the environmental kinship. So it's a guide to the idea of learning with, for, about, and in the natural world. It's all free. So there's a website there that you can go and have a look at. If you'd like to do some work around the floor books or inquiry-based learning, have a look at the Mind Stretchers Academy. It has a newsletter called Inquiries. And in that newsletter, what I do is I give examples of floor books, all nature-based, and help people understand the place of something called a talking tub, which is a place of dialogue, which we create in order to help a child-led inquiry move forward. And then recently, during the pandemic, we were funded by the Scottish Government to really take this kind of work forward, and we set up something called the Virtual Nature School. It's run through the Living Classrooms KIC, a charitable trust. And that means that on there, you can go to a YouTube channel. If you Google Virtual Nature School, and you'll find films and provocations all about how you might use the natural world in your practice. but you can also download something called practitioner provocations, which are thought sheets, things to get us thinking about the way that we work with and for the natural world. And lastly, you can always go there and download something called the Nature Play Diaries. All of those are free, and hopefully they'll help you in your journey towards becoming a nature pedagogue. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to Claire for the presentation. I'll hand over to Panima in a second just to close the event. I'll just remind you, if you can, just complete that feedback form, which will appear when you press leave on Zoom. That feedback's really important to us to hear what you think of the event. So Panima, I'll pass over to you and I'll say goodbye.
Thank you, Glenn. And just want to say that was a fantastic presentation. I think I really enjoyed that one, and I hope you did too. But thank you very much for all our speakers. But most importantly, thank you all for joining, because I know how busy you are and it's really hard to take some time off to be able to do this. But thank you for your contribution as well. And we will send you all these details of the presentations as well. And have a nice rest of the day and enjoy. Thank you very much indeed.